Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
No, not you. You're too chicken shit to be a member of the Dynamic Duo Club? Okay, then great. I'll find somebody else. Somebody who can keep up with me.
Seth, you have to listen to me.
You're afraid to dive into the plasma pool, aren't you? You're afraid to be destroyed and recreated, aren't you? I bet you think that you woke me up about the flesh, don't you? But you only know society's straight line about the flesh. You can't penetrate beyond society's sick, gray fear of the flesh. Drink deep or taste not the plasma spring. See what I'm saying? I'm not just talking about sex and penetration. I'm talking about penetration beyond the veil of the flesh. A deep, penetrating dive into the plasma pool.
Accessing historical database. Year 2020. The tech giants become aware of the greatest threat to their corporatist domination. An obscure science and tech podcast becomes a major factor in a peaceful open source revolt against the military Silicon Valley industrial complex. The podcast, Sovryn Tech. Its host, Dr. Brian Sovryn. The tech giants tried to stop Sovryn Tech. They can't.
Woo, the man of tomorrow is here for you, baby. And, you know, I'm not alone, and I love it. Because this whole week of recording, I have not been alone much at all. But this time around, of course, if you listen to the most recent TIE Fighter Renegades, you knew that action with me and Rob. But this time around, I'm being joined by the love of my life,
Woo!
Ellen Sovryn. Woo! Yes.
Yes. Thank you for having me on.
Yes. Oh, everybody loves it when you're on. And you've been on. Well, okay. Let's give people an update here. So you have officially. Well, I don't know how you want to call it. Do you want to call it officially? You have graduated. Like you're done. Because you know you've been on quite a bit in the past few months, and a lot of times we were discussing what it was like going to university, especially during the COVID-19 situation. And now you have graduated. Can we say that you are done?
Yeah, I mean, I still have some trepidation about that term because I haven't received my diploma yet. But my classes are over. I've finished finals. I've already calculated my grades and estimated that I've passed all of them. So I think I can safely say that I've graduated, which feels fucking awesome because this has been the biggest dream of my life thus far, and I've finally achieved it. I mean, let's not even talk about employment yet. I mean,
right.
I just have the diploma that says that I did the work, and I'm ready to go. I can basically work at whatever I want to now.
Sure. Yeah. So just to remind everyone, I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago that you were on, or well, no, it was longer than a couple of weeks ago. It was maybe a month ago that you were on last. You have graduated with, like, what would you say your title is right now?
So I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Chemical Engineering,
right?
With a bioengineering option, but I also have an associate's degree in bioengineering. So it's like at this intersection of chemical and bioengineering.
Yeah, and so you're the kind of person where we could call you a scientist or an engineer, and both would be applicable. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you? I mean, do you think like S4 or Area 51 is going to be knocking on your door here anytime soon, you know, saying, can we get the brightest? And no,
I'm on too many lists for that to happen. I've made some friends and enemies that I think publicly are publicly acknowledged and wouldn't look good on that sort of like if they were doing
application,
a security check into my background.
Too much the rebel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've gone against the grain with too many things. I mean, there's photos of me online holding signs that say, like, the war on drugs is a war on you.
I love it.
Yeah, and in my associations with certain other organizations, like I was a host on Free Talk Live for a few months.
Sovryn Tech sponsor, by the way. Yep.
Yes. So anyway, I just feel like I would not be applicable, like I would not be eligible to work at a high security clearance type job or facility.
Well, you know, I don't want to say you're wrong, and I love your answer. I think when we get into some subjects in this episode, and Area 51 is about to come up, might turn out that actually you might be employable. At least when I kind of share my opinions on the matter. But because as often happens, so we got two things here.
Well, I'm employable to like corporations, but I don't know if the government would be interested.
Oh, I know. Well, see that, but we'll talk about it. We'll get into that. But yes, of course you are. And I know that they're going to be knocking on this door to get you.
I would get freaked out if they came knocking on this door to get me. That just sounds scary.
Yeah, that's true. And I might have to do something about it. But regardless, so we have an episode chock full of things to talk about. But we are definitely going to discuss the strange. And when you come on, somehow it just kind of happens. I don't really plan it. I sure as fuck don't plan when these stories are going to drop. But we end up talking about, you know, aliens and all other kinds of wacky shit when you come on.
Yeah, it's a weird bit of synchronicity, and I wonder if it has to do with our galactic mindset.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Actually, I had somebody on Twitter. They called me, or they were relating to me and saying, you know, like this might be true for the everyday person, but not for galactic brains like us. And I was like, galactic brains. I should open up the show saying, welcome, galactic brains. You know,
it almost sounds like if you were to like cut your skull open, there'd just be like a galaxy that pops out.
I'm just the visuals,
like you're looking inside a planetarium or something.
I love it. Well, anyway, so a tradition that we have also, at least when you're on, is that we talk about the books that we're reading. The books I've been reading, not terribly worth talking about, or at least not at this stage. So
you just read boring books. That's all you do, right?
Yeah, I read horrible books. No, it just, they're not. I mentioned it before. Like I'm rereading the Anita Blake series, and you know that's going to be actually a new book comes out in February. I mean, these are like 24, 25 books. Like there's so many of them, and they really are only great when you get to like book 10. And I think I'm on like book 9 now.
And these are all vampire books?
Yeah, vampire, werewolves, all that wacky stuff. I mean, it's really a great series. It's written by Laurell K. Hamilton. She started these back in the 90s. I first started reading them when there was this thing called the Science Fiction Book Club that you'd get a catalog for. And I remember how I got it. Like I started going to conventions and I must have like given my address to somebody there or whatever. And then suddenly I'm getting this catalog and you get like 6 hardcover books for $1.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. Because
that's an awesome deal.
Fuck yeah, it was. I mean, I got some amazing books. Got like the Star Wars Encyclopedia. I got the Lord of the Rings trilogy and this gorgeous hardcover set, all this stuff. But those magazines at the time with the Science Fiction Book Club in the 90s, they very heavily promoted this character of Anita Blake. At the time, the book was brand new. It was the first novel. And by Laurell K. Hamilton. And it was sort of her first thing to do. And I was like, I mean, they plastered it, it felt like. And so I picked it up. And I loved it. I thought it was really, really wild. Partly because because they're sort of murder mystery novels, at least at first, it gave the author an excuse to explore some taboo things, especially sexually. And so, like, for me, I ate it up. I thought this stuff was amazing at the time. And you just end up sticking with the series, and the series gets more and more explicit and more extreme, and you just kind of ride with it and you run with it. And for me at the time, those books definitely spoke to me in a very real way. So I've been rereading them because it's just been so long. And now today, like, I would have never done this years ago, but today you can listen to books, at 2.5, 3x or whatever. And so I can get through an Anita Blake book in a day, less than a day. Hell, I could do 2 a day if I had, a little more freedom of bandwidth in my own mind. And so, yeah, otherwise I don't think I would bother to go through the entire series again. But now that's a really viable thing, is that a lot of times you can read some of these books in the same amount of time it would take to watch a movie or two. And that makes it a worthwhile venture, I think,
And what do you really like about these books? Is it that they're so sexual?
Well, boy, so you asked that question. It's more than that. That's certainly, like, the author, she really does get away with talking about, like, sexual matters that you just couldn't normally get away with in any other genre.
Like what?
Just like kind of the wacky, like, more mental stuff. It's really hard to describe. It would take a long time, longer than I want to spend on it. But let's just say that she definitely explores, like, a more galactic mindset of sexuality. How about that? Does that work?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and not only that, like, she's really clever with how she explains, clever on the level of, like, the Matrix, with how she explains things like magic and, like vampires and werewolves and all this other stuff. They're just wildly fascinating. It's a very unique series of novels, but brilliantly done. And again, I've been reading them forever. I think I dropped off at, like, book 16. So there are some new ones that I need to catch up on, and finish reading. But I mean, I've been reading these for over 20 years now, like, which is hard to believe, that these books have been around, that long, and that series is still going. I don't know if we're ever going to, well, no, there are new authors who still do long running series like that, but I didn't plan on talking about these that much because I planned on the Area 51 joke that I made earlier being a segue into what you're reading and what I have taken a brief respite in the Anita Blake novels in reading what you read, which we don't always do this, but every once in a while.
Don't be upset, because that's my job as the co-host, is to pull this stuff out of you.
Well, you do it like no one else. You always have. But, well, anyway, the book you're reading, now this is interesting.
Well, I actually finished reading it already.
Yeah.
So the book that I was reading, which, by the way, I did finish the Book of Enki a while back.
Oh, yeah.
We don't need to talk about that. I think we already talked about
We hit the
that
high
last
notes.
Time. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. But anyway, so the book that I finished reading recently it was called Dreamland by Bob Lazar. And it's essentially a book about Bob Lazar working at S4, which is close to Area 51, and some of the things that he worked on. Now, I know that Bob Lazar has been kind of famous since the 80s.
Yeah, late 80s.
When he first did an interview with George Knapp, and he kind of gained he gained global fame at that time. And I guess what has brought on this resurgence of interest in Bob Lazar was a recent interview that he did, I think it was just a couple years ago, with oh crap, what is his name?
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan, yes.
Yeah, I like to forget his name too.
He's like the most famous podcaster, though.
For whatever reason.
You can't ignore him,
Yeah, right, yeah.
And I actually listened to this interview after I finished the book, and I thought it was really good too, but we can get to that later. So anyway, this book, Dreamland, is called that because sometimes that's another name that is given to Area 51. I guess there's all sorts of names that people have called it.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really interesting. The book opened up with a foreword by George Knapp, who was the investigative journalist that broke the story. And he
out of Las Vegas. He worked for like the local CBS,
right?
I think out of Las Vegas. George Knapp. Yeah, continue.
So anyway, he was saying like how he got to know Bob and why he believes Bob's story. And he brought up some points about how other journalists have tried to debunk his story. But the only reason that they believe that Bob Lazar's story isn't believable is because they haven't done the full, complete, in-depth study of his history that George Knapp has. And it really does make sense after listening to the book why organizations would try to erase Bob's history. So anyway, Bob starts out by talking about his job at Los Alamos, working with the particle collider there. Then he ends up meeting a famous scientist who gives him a reference to work at S4. And he ends up working there for just a few months, I believe. But he's like going through the security clearance process, which includes like him being followed all the time, his phone being tapped.
And this is happening so the book came out in 2019. What you're describing is happening in the 80s, right? Like
yes.
He's working in 1981. Or like this started in 1981.
Yeah, the whole story occurs in the 80s.
Yeah.
So anyway, technology was very different back then. Protocols were different, security and all that.
Sure.
Certainly not the level of... I think we were just talking about this morning, that the level of security that you would expect from a military installation now, like post 9/11, is like orders of magnitude greater than what it was before then.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading this and he's describing, and we'll cut to like what he says he was working on, because eventually they show him, they being, whoever is in charge at S4, which is, kind of attached to Area 51. Like as I'm listening to this, and the security protocols, the lack thereof, really was the hump I had to get over mentally when I'm listening to this book, because I'm almost finished with it. I've got about an hour left as far as the audiobook goes. And it's an 8-hour book or something like that.
Yeah, it's not too long.
No, it's not too long. But I mean, I have, I was in the U.S. Army, and I have experience with some of this protocol and what it takes to get into installations. I mean, I've never been to Area 51 or anything like that, but I have some understanding of how these installations work. And his descriptions, I'm just listening to it, and I'm just like, I can't believe this. Like that's all you had to do, to get in there, or even like the use of biometrics and a lot of other things. I'm like, no, like those were the things. Again, that's not to debunk his story. It's just remarkable to me, that there was a stage where things were, in my opinion, that lax, because I think that most of us feel that when we think about like government installations, like an Area 51 style thing, that, oh, it's, top secret, nobody can talk about it, blah, 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 blah. As to where for him, he's going home at night and having dinner. I mean, like, it's not a big deal at all, ultimately.
Right. Yeah. Interestingly, back then, Area 51 wasn't even well known. Like, nobody knew about this place before Bob broke his story.
Well, nobody admitted to it.
Right.
Yeah.
There were locals that had seen things that, they tried to bring it up with reporters and whatnot, but people didn't really have evidence. There wasn't a strong story there. But I think part of what's going on in the book is like, he can't tell you every detail, but also there, I think, are a lot of security measures that are below the level of like perception. For example, there could be cameras that he doesn't see. There could be people lurking, like
Yeah.
security lurking around that he doesn't see.
Yeah.
And even while he's working in the S4 complex, he's constantly being watched. He knows this,
Right.
because they know everything that he's done, and there are constantly security guards coming in and out.
Yeah.
So anyway,
well, it gets. Let me interject a couple things. So you have S4 itself. Nobody knows where this is. No one can like really prove that it exists. As
it's
I
like in
understand
the
it.
middle of the desert. They made the entrance look like a natural rock formation,
Right.
so it would be difficult for anyone to find it.
Right. It's not like Area 51 where, yeah, even before it was admitted to, by the government that it actually even fucking exists, people knew there was something there.
Yes.
For varying reasons. I mean, you have, like the airline that they're the red and white planes. And I know he mentions them briefly, but that come out of Las Vegas, out of the what is it? The Janet fleet or whatever they call it.
Yeah. It's like a 45-minute flight from there to the Area 51.
Right. So I mean, people know about that and that's kind of out there. Now, a lot of people forget, and I've brought this up before on the show, the first time that I know of, and this isn't mentioned in the book at all. In fact, it never gets mentioned by anybody, which I always find kind of strange. The first time that I know of that Area 51 was ever admitted to exist was like in 1992 or 93, and it was on the Montel Williams show. And he drove up to it in a Humvee. Now, Montel Williams is, I mean, kind of CIA / well, I mean, there's debate about what his history and intelligence was, but he was just a talk show host in the 90s, like Maury Povich and all these other cats. And, but he drove right up to it and everything. And that was, and he got the letter and he read it on the air. I was a little kid watching this and go, whoa, what? That's real. Now Bob Lazar's big interview was in 89.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess he talked about Area 51 during that, but again, it was not admitted to exist until just a few years later after that. On, of all things, fucking Montel Williams,
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is interesting, and I want to bring up fast, is that later on, he starts to get followed around because he's going through the application process of getting to work for S4 / Area 51.
They're still trying to approve his clearance.
Right. And so him and his wife at the time, they are, they're being watched. Like these people are following him. What's funny is today, like I know that was common practice even 15 years ago. The idea of like following people, that's got to be like non-existent today. There's no need for you to have to follow anyone. You can just
you could just do it all digitally,
right, over their smartphone. Like you can hear everything they say. You know exactly where they are. I mean, like there's no that's got it. It's just funny to read about that and think about it. It's like, wow, we used to think that was like really scary, when now that's not necessary at all. And all because people voluntarily hand over, the very information that you would get followed about. Which I found, it's just funny to listen to this, and to kind of picture the 80s like that. He does do an excellent job of describing everything that's going on, which lends some credibility to his story. But anyway, let's continue as far as Area 51 goes, as far as he eventually, because he's working on this project, right? He's working on a propulsion system and he's trying to he's tasked with reverse engineering it. Have I got this right?
Yeah, so his specialty, ever since he was young, his hobbies included propulsion systems, rockets, things like that. And that's one of the ways that he was able to get this job. He actually put a rocket engine in his car and drove it around town, and he was on the front page of the newspaper. So anyway, he was very skilled in propulsion systems. So, and that's how he was able to get this job. There was apparently an opening at S4 for a propulsion specialist. So that's what he went in to study. So he goes through all of this paperwork, all of the security clearance stuff. He finally shows up on the job, and his lab partner, whose name I guess is Barry, shows him the propulsion system that they're going to be working on. And this thing is, well, it's not of this world. From what he can tell, there is no known technology on this planet that could do what he saw that thing do.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what it did was it created a gravity or anti-gravity field.
Right. Like he tossed a ball at it or something and it just shot up into the air.
Yeah, he tried reaching out and touching it with his hand and it was repelled.
Mm-hmm.
And the briefings that he was reading about this project, they said all sorts of crazy things that like he didn't even believe. Some of this stuff he said could have been misinformation to possibly like misdirect him. Like if he leaked the story, they would know where it came from because it would include these false facts.
Yep.
Or it could be real. Or it could just be altered truth. Like maybe instead of coming from Zeta Reticuli, these aliens were actually like, I don't know, living somewhere in the solar system and they weren't actually aliens, but like ancient humans. But there's no way to know.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the story he was told. And I love that in this book, all he will talk about is what he's actually seen and worked on. He's not putting forward any theories of any kind.
Yeah, so this is another thing I really liked about it. Now he does eventually get to see the craft, as it were, that this
well,
engine
let's just
comes
get
from.
right to it. Yeah.
Well,
eventually he convinces his liaison to allow them to see the craft.
Yeah, and he does this saying, "Well, I need to know the bigger picture to really understand the propulsion system. So, what is this? Where did this come from? What is this?"
Yeah.
And he does end up seeing it. I want to kind of backstep a little bit. He does, because there's 2 points. One is that he does claim to see photographs of non-human intelligences. Like he claims to see photographs basically of aliens, and they're strange. Like they're cut open and they don't really have organs. They just kind of have this weird fleshy central tissue mass inside. They're not human, and he sort of, so far from what I've read, unless he talks about it more in the last hour, he just mentions it and then moves on. Okay.
Yeah, because they never come up again in his work.
Right. So that's interesting, and we'll definitely come back to that too. But one of the things that I really like about this book, because one of the things I hate about most alien books, most UFO books and extraterrestrial books, is that 90% of them sell you a philosophy. Like it'll somewhere in the book, they'll start saying, we need to have peace on Earth. We need to be ready for these aliens. And they are trying to tell us how to live. And somebody espouses some kind of weird quasi thought leadership piece. And it drives me up the fucking wall for a lot of reasons. But he's not doing that at all.
Yeah, no, one of the things that makes me like Bob Lazar and actually feel that his story is believable is that he speaks in a very technical scientific language.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what he's talking about. He's very intelligent, but he's not he's not a sociopath or megalomaniac.
Mm-hmm.
There's no red flags of any kind. He's just telling you what he worked on.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
He's not trying to change the world. He just thinks that people should know about this.
Yes, you hit at it exactly. And that's what I like about it. He is not trying to change the world, because most of these UFOologists and other people, they go to stupid lengths, and it's like they're trying to change the world. And it just, again, drives me nuts. Anyway, so he does end up seeing the craft.
Yeah, which initially was a big problem because, and this is a frustration he voices several times throughout the book, when the government or the military have a secret technology that they don't want anyone else to know about, and they're trying to experiment on it and figure out how it works, they compartmentalize the department so much and keep people from talking to each other across departments.
Like they did with the Manhattan Project.
Right, but it hinders the progress of discovery so much that they might as well shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, I understand. I can hear that. And I mean, to be clear, this is exactly how Silicon Valley operates as well. Like the tech giants, same deal. You go and ask them, hey, are you working on this? Are you working on that? And they'll always say, no, I think that's the guy down the hall. Like, there is this compartmentalization, the separation of what everybody's working on. And the idea would be so that they don't see the big picture. Now, I mean, the scary part with that And of course, certainly this is what people, hindsight 2020, looking back on the Manhattan Project is that, yeah, you don't want people to know what you're building because it's something that terrible, and if they knew, they'd stop, they'd quit. So anyway, yeah, so there's this compartmentalization going on. I guess if there's an S4, maybe that suggests that there's an S1, S2, and S3 where people are working on things.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so he makes the argument that, like, I can't understand this propulsion system completely unless I see how it fits into the larger system. So he is able to go and see the craft and be inside of it. Interestingly, he says that it looks like it was made for beings who are like 3 feet tall, because it's very cramped inside for an average human being.
Right.
And also, he made some observations about how it was made. Like, it looked like it was sculpted out of wax and then heated so that, like, all of the sharp angles were actually curved. There were no sharp angles at all. It was all curvature. Everything had a radius of some kind. And he just thought that was beyond humans' abilities to manufacture something like that. He couldn't tell if it was made out of metal or ceramic or what. So this is all really fascinating to me, and I'm kind of blown away because I'm not while I feel that it is possible that UFOs exist, I feel like it's much more likely that the government does have some sort of advanced non-human technology that they're keeping secret from the public. Or from other countries, for that matter.
Yeah, you're a skeptic. I mean, you're not somebody who just...
I'm an open-minded skeptic.
Yeah, you are open-minded, absolutely, yes. But you're somebody who really needs some good proof.
Yeah. And, like, in this book, the only proof that Bob offers is his word. But there's evidence that he worked at S4. There's evidence that he worked at Los Alamos. He has no reason to lie about this stuff. He sounds very professional. And interestingly, even at the end of the book, he says that he wishes that he never said anything because it was such a priceless opportunity to work with that cutting-edge technology.
Right. Yeah, so now, I mean, there's claims around this guy that kind of go both ways. Like, there's people who say, no, actually, a lot of his employers said he never worked there. And then there's, like, he was, he would claim that these were, I'm not sure what the term I want to use, but that they were a farce. He had an FBI raid on his home and place of business. His claim is that it had to do with, they were trying to steal element 115 back.
Which he had a sample of. Which,
is something related to the craft that he was supposedly working on, or that he was reverse engineering. And I mean, there's lots of interesting little theories and factoids that do kind of get like scientific theories that do get laid out in the book that I found to be like the idea that Zeta Reticuli is what? Well, I mean, it's a binary star system, right?
Right. So the gravity there would be much greater. So a stable element, 115, could potentially have formed naturally there.
Right.
Like humans have created an isotope of element 115, actually multiple, but they're all unstable and they decay within like a few thousandths of a second or whatever. But yeah, supposedly there's an isotope that is stable, and like we found that this can be true. It's just that we can't create it because that does require so much force to make a giant nuclei like that.
Right.
But in a star system like Zeta Reticuli, it could be natural.
Yeah. So, I mean, and so there's a claim that, well, what that raid was really about was that, but then, when you do a FOIA request, the raid was actually about a murder case. He was convicted for being part of a prostitution ring, which in Las Vegas, what a shock. But then apparently a lot of those charges got dropped. I mean, again, he would easily claim, and of course people around him would easily claim, well, this is the government trying to like shut him down and keep him from talking about these sorts of things. There is a documentary. We haven't watched this yet. But there is a documentary that was made a couple years ago in 2018 about Bob Lazar and everything around Area 51 and so on. I mean, I read the book and it's intriguing, other than the very brief mention of these, I guess, what could be grays. I mean, we're guessing, because like the 3 foot tall people.
Yeah, well, he didn't say anything about the way that they looked.
No, not really. Just how they got cut open,
Yeah.
and that they were missing limbs. Other than that, like, here's the thing. I could very easily believe that he saw what he saw and worked on what he worked on. I could believe that S4 is a thing that exists. Okay. But then once you start saying aliens, I kind of check out, because it's like, I mean, I get why people go there, because he had a great analogy of the craft in this, where he said that imagine like a motorcycle, just appearing to people a few hundred years ago
on the Oregon Trail.
Yeah, on the Oregon Trail, right? And like, yeah, maybe eventually they'd figure out how it could help them haul some grains or something. I don't know.
They might get it started and be able to drive it around eventually, but they'd never be able to refuel it.
Right. They have no, yeah, exactly.
Or to repair it.
Yeah. So, and that's interesting, and I think you were saying, I've yet to listen to the Joe Rogan interview that he did. But on that, was there a claim that one of the craft was something that they found that they, so, cause like one claim is that it's the Roswell craft, but then there's multiple craft apparently. And one of them is one that they dug up, as in it's been here for hundreds of years.
Part of an archaeological expedition.
Exactly. Tell me more.
Well, he just mentioned that. He said that he heard this from his lab partner, that one of them was ancient.
Right.
But they do have multiple. And like he said one of them looked like it had a hole in it, as if it had been shot down or something.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know. And like, he doesn't know either. The history of these craft is mysterious. They won't tell him how long they've had these things or how long they've been trying to reverse engineer it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the only thing he knows about the history of this project is that the person who worked there before him died because they tried to cut open the reactor that he was working on.
Right.
And he was actually terrified of the power that was inside of this thing.
Yeah.
The whole time he was working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, see, if you want to tell me that there was some previous civilization on Earth that might have like developed this stuff, or that had some kind of advanced technology and whatever modern governments happen to find it and things like that, that's infinitely more believable. I would argue a lot easier to try and prove. But instead people just fucking run to aliens, or they attach it to some alien theory instead of trying to, go where the evidence best suggests, and Occam's razor gets, thrown out the door. And yeah, you lose me or not you, but I mean, people lose me when they start saying, and so it came from Zeta Reticuli. It's like, oh, wait, what?
Yeah. Like, how they got that information is totally left in the dark. We don't know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But what we do know is that the way that he describes how the craft works, it generates a gravity field around itself, which allows it to move in ways that traditional physics say our airplanes cannot move.
Right.
Like making right angle turns at hundreds of miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that he even says that space and time are essentially the same thing, and gravity.
Yeah.
So if you can bend gravity, you bend time.
Right.
And there are mysterious things about the way this operates. Like, apparently when he saw a test flight being performed, he also saw that there's somebody with a radio, like a regular radio, talking to the craft.
Okay.
Which wasn't supposed to be possible, because like, if you're sending radio waves through a gravitational field of that strength,
they wouldn't be getting through.
Right.
Yeah.
But somehow they were. And there's a lot of strange things about this. But anyway, like, the speed at which these craft could move suggest that it is possible for faster than light or close to light speed travel. So the story of this thing coming from Zeta Reticuli, there's a little more credence lent to it in that respect. Like in the fact that, like, if this technology exists, then it could be possible.
Yeah, because, you know, once you start like bending light, you know, and like affecting gravity, you know, a lot of the concerns around how long does it take, you know, I mean, all bets are off at that point.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about G-forces or anything.
Right. Yeah, so, you know, after reading, and folks, this is leading somewhere, because there was a story that dropped a couple weeks ago. And this is what I mean. These are the things you can't plan, because you started reading this book before the story dropped. That comes from someone who was heavily involved with the Israeli space program. And we'll get into that in a minute. Okay. Again, Sovereign Tech usually is not a show about this sort of thing.
We're not saying aliens. Aliens are real. They're here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're not going there. But this is stuff that's relevant, and I think there are alternatives that don't get discussed or brought up enough that I think are worthwhile for us to bring up. That can kind of rarely or more uniquely happen here. But so, well, anyway, let me ask you this, Ellen. Let's just go here. Did this book like convince you? What did this book convince you of? I don't want to, I mean, I could like lay out, you know, did it convince you of aliens? Did it do this? I don't want to put it that way. I just want to ask the broader question. What did it convince you of?
Well, it reinforced this idea that I've had for a while, that I don't want to work for the government.
Yeah, right on.
After hearing about that experience, it just sounds too stressful, and I'm not going to deal with it. It convinced me that, yes, definitely the U.S. government has secrets that I think are beyond the comprehension of most people, even most scientists. And that's why they've been able to hide it so well for so long, because these stories get out and people just don't believe it, because they can't. It's like the best, most well-hidden secret. Because once you start talking about technology that is like an era ahead of our own, it just seems too unreal, and people aren't able to believe it. Like, imagine if you went to the Oregon Trail and you told people, like, someday you'll be able to pull a lever on the handle of a bike and just speed off. No horses needed.
Right.
They'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and that'd be magic. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, but other than that, I don't know that it really convinced me. Like, I'm not going to say it convinced me that aliens are here. I'm not going to say that it convinced me of really anything else, because this is all, it's a first-hand account, which gives it more credence than, say, a second or third-hand account.
Right.
But it's also, I mean, obviously everybody has a faulty memory. There are some details that might differ over time from the truth. I believe that the essential story that he told is true about the secret technology. Yeah, I don't want to say anything beyond that.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I hold the statement I hold the idea, and it's a statement that I've made many times on the show over the years, that, like, I'm open to the U.S. government having wildly advanced aircraft that we don't know about. And I've brought up historical examples. I mean, so I'm bringing up things that we know exist. And that is, you know, we didn't know about the SR-71 spy plane until like almost 15, 20 years after that it was initially used. We didn't know about the F-117 stealth fighter until around the same time frame after it had already been developed and used. You know, like there are craft that get developed that, you know, people might say, ooh, I saw this weird thing. And I mean, especially when you look at the SR-71 or the, you know, F-117, those are wild looking craft. I mean, they look very different than any other airplane. I mean, they still have the basic principles of an airplane, but they look wildly different than anything else out there. And they were a very well kept secret for a good long while. You know, I mean, if you can keep a secret like that for a decade, granted it wasn't the social media age or anything, you're doing pretty good. And so, you know, the idea that the government probably has incredibly advanced aircraft is not outrageous at all. You know, like, I mean, we have historical examples where that was, you know, where that was true. And some of them, you know, are still kind of secret, even if we do kind of know what they are. Like I think I know exactly what's at Area 51. And it's a Boeing, it's a 737 called the Rat 55. And it's, as far as what exactly it does, we know it's used to test varying stealth technologies. And it's been upgraded and reused for a very long time. Fuck. I'm almost comfortable. I could almost claim that I've seen the thing, but anyway, we'll kind of leave it at that. I mean, people have seen it. There's pictures of it. It's not like it's, you know, it's not privileged information in any way, shape or form. But point being is that yes, like there are these kinds of things, but the idea that the government like somehow has technology that's like wildly advanced, even that I kind of debate a bit. Like I wonder about, you know, like the computers that we have as just, you know, private individuals, the government doesn't have computers that are not in the same, not that are the same size. Like their laptops are the same laptops that we use. You know, they have supercomputers, sure, that are very, very powerful. But you know, this whole idea that's been going on for a while where, oh, the government has this wildly advanced technology, not really. But
that's assuming that they are using human technology and just building upon that instead of finding something that is so advanced that no human on this planet can even begin to understand, let alone replicate it. The point, I think what's important about this gravity generator is that they only have like a handful.
Right.
Because they've found them. They don't have any methods or any means of replicating these things.
It's or not perhaps like, even using them.
Right. And to be able to build up our existing technology to get to that level, they would have to know what path to follow, like what discoveries need to be made in order to get there. But like, there's just too much space between our technology and that technology. There's no way to recreate it or even to mimic it.
Yeah.
So, like, they might have found it and have it, but they can't do anything with it except for, like, tinker with it.
Well, I think that's an interesting point for you to bring up in and of itself. You know, I mean, even that is a very different perspective than what most people who buy into, say, the Roswell story or some other thing, because the rest, you know, everybody else would be saying, oh, yeah, the government's using this stuff all day long. You know,
how are they going to use it? I mean, like, they might take one of these 9 generators and put it in a craft and fly it around, but like it's too precious. It's a prized possession. They're not going to let that thing fall into somebody else's hands. They're not going to let anything happen to this. They're going to keep it safe where they can keep their eyes on it.
Yeah. And I really am genuine. I really am open to that sort of thing exists. It'd be dynamite if we had one other person that could reiterate what Bob Lazar, or, you know, that could bolster what Bob Lazar, you know, had said. Because it's tough to just take the word of one guy, you know?
Yeah. Well, in the interview that he did with Joe Rogan, he actually made a good point. Like, he said he thought that his lab partner was going to come out after him, but he was hassled so much after he came out. You know, like, he had his life threatened multiple times. His birth certificate just disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah, which his family was terrified about that. You know, his employment history was disappearing. His diploma was disappearing. Like, he was a non-person essentially after this. So I think that scared a lot of people out of coming out and speaking up about what they had worked on.
Yeah, you know, and that's something that's worthwhile bringing up as well, is that this is something that is in the purview of government capability today. is that they can effectively erase you. They don't have to kill you. Like they can just erase that you ever existed. Today, more so, because everything's all digital records, and, computers absolutely lie. They lie 24/7. And so that makes this all the harder, right? Because, again, you have people coming out and saying, well, actually, no, Bob Lazar didn't work here, didn't work, blah, 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 it's easy to erase that shit. Hell, even before, digital records, even the government, or not just the government had that ability. Like Scientologists were trying forever to make shit disappear, and they actually did a pretty good job of it, which is why the FBI finally stepped in and said, okay, you guys have to stop this shit, So, these are plausible things to happen. And it's very tough to prove or disprove when someone says, hey, I worked here, especially if you're some, part of some black project, Black Ops project or something along those lines, or Black Site project. It's very difficult to prove or disprove, because absolutely, yes, the government will just erase the shit.
Yeah, but I definitely hear what you're saying. It is hard to take the word of one guy, especially since nobody followed him. Mm-hmm. Nobody has told the same story that he has.
Right.
And I don't think any other like UFO alien person who's like revealing the secret truth. Mm-hmm. No, there's no informer out there that has the credibility, I think, that Bob Lazar does, or that at least sounds sane and doesn't sound schizophrenic.
Well, we'll see if that's true, because
yeah, actually, the story that we have lined up touches on that.
Yeah, actually hints at, well, somebody who is credentialed and who made some pretty wild claims. You want to get into that?
Sure, let's do it.
Right.
I don't have anything else to talk about for book club. Actually, next time I'm on, I'll talk about the book that I'm listening to now, which is The Happiness Hypothesis.
Oh yeah. Okay, this is what you've shared with me so far. This is going to be an interesting, conversation, but we'll do that on next time. But let's take a break, then we'll come back and we're going to talk about the Galactic Federation.
Woo!
Ooh, what is that? You'll find out. Be back with more. Hey, is Sovereign Tech not enough for you? Well, let me tell you about something you'll never get enough of. No, I mean it. We're talking about a radio show and podcast that goes all night long, 7 nights a week, 3 hours a night, 365 days a year, and has been going since the early aughts, baby. I am talking about none other than Free Talk Live. It's the show you control. That's right. It's an open phones call-in show that is ready for you. And if you're worried that your voice isn't going to get heard, don't be. We are talking about the only libertarian radio show stateside. And not only that, it's also the number 26 talk show in the United States. Start listening now and go ahead and hit that massive back catalog at freetalklive.com. The Golden Stallion guarantees a good time, and you might even find some episodes with me on them when you do. That's freetalklive.com, and we thank them for sponsoring Sovereign Tech. Let's get back to the show.
The main story.
And we are back for some more Sovereign Tech, and our main story, we have like two main stories here. One that has nothing to do with aliens, but might actually be relevant to space travel. I think it could go there, or might be of interest in that vein, but we'll get into that after this. But this plays off directly with the conversation we were having around Bob Lazar. And this story dropped on December 10th, 2020. So just a few days ago, as of this recording. And I'll read the headline. It's from the Jerusalem Post. And its former Israeli space security chief says aliens exist, humanity not ready. Now here's the underline here. This quote-unquote Galactic Federation has supposedly been in contact with Israel and the U.S. for years, but are keeping themselves a secret to prevent hysteria until humanity is ready. Ellen, at first blush, What do you think about that headline?
I think it's very interesting that these aliens chose to make contact with Israel and the U.S. and no one else.
That's very interesting.
Because, from the sky, you can't really tell where the borders are.
Yeah.
So, in Israel's a very small place.
Very small.
Anyway, I don't understand that. Did they not make contact with any other civilizations?
Were they looking for their old spaceport? Book of Enki?
Oh,
No.
maybe. But how did the U.S. become involved? Is it because the U.S. is like the sugar daddy of Israel or something?
Wow. Wow. I'd just like to say that I'm Jewish, and it's not unfair. I mean, the United States does send Israel millions of dollars in financial aid, which is kind of weird, among other things. But regardless, let's read a bit of the story, shall we? So, has the state of Israel made contact with aliens? According to retired Israeli officer and current professor Chaim Bashid, the answer is yes. But this has been kept a secret because, quote, humanity isn't ready, end quote. Speaking in an interview and this is terrible, I am Jewish, and some of the stuff I don't always read right. An interview with Yediot Aeronaut, forget it. Ashid, who served as the head of Israel's space program for nearly 30 years and is a 3-time recipient of the Israel Security Award, explained that Israel and the U.S. have both been dealing with aliens for years, and this by no means refers to immigrants, with Ashid clarifying the existence of a galactic federation. The 87-year-old former head of the Defense Ministry Space Division gave further descriptions about exactly what sort of agreements have been made between the aliens and the U.S., which ostensibly have been made because they wish to research and understand, quote, the fabric of the universe, end quote. This cooperation includes a secret underground base on Mars, where there are American and alien representatives. If true, this would coincide with U.S. President Donald Trump's creation of the Space Force as the 5th branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, though it is unclear how long this sort of relationship, if any, has been going on between the U.S. and its reported extraterrestrial allies. Okay, I want to stop for a second on this. The Space Force. Did you hear about what they call them?
What did they call them?
They're,
the Guardians?
Yeah, they're called Guardians. So dumb.
There's so many things I want to say about this. I mean, Donald Trump is the last person that I feel like a super intelligent race would want to have contact with.
Right.
Secondly, if Donald Trump did know about aliens, that's the only secret besides Stormy Daniels that he's kept.
Woo. What does Stormy know about the aliens? Jeez. She did make that one. No, anyway, never mind. I'm kidding. I have never watched Stormy Daniels' movie. I don't know.
Well, anyway, and this is something that other people have said too. I'm not the first to say this. It seems like it would be very hard for him to keep that secret about aliens.
Well,
is America the foremost leader in technology in the world? What about Russia? I guess I'm not sure why they chose America and Israel.
Yeah. So you raise an interesting point, and which can bring in other conspiracy theories, as it were. And I don't use that term necessarily pejoratively, at least certainly not all the time, because there are plenty of conspiracies that have ended up being absolutely true. And I have plenty of what could be called conspiracy theories in my own mind that I also think, strong evidence stands for, to where you wouldn't even call them theories, but they're still conspiracies. So I don't like that term to necessarily be a pejorative. In fact, I'll probably bring one up here in a few minutes, but regardless, alternative 3, what is this? I don't want to spend a ton of time describing it. Basically, alternative 3 is there's a book and there was an episode of a totally straight British documentary show from the 70s called Science Report, that they were getting canceled, and they did one final episode. And it was on April Fool's Day that it ended up getting released. They did one final episode, and in this episode, they claimed to be exposing a conspiracy where the United States and Russia were building a base on Mars, that they went to Mars, they found something on Mars, and like the kind of the tape that they got stops there. Now, the rub is that like there's a brain drain going on during this episode of Science Report where like all these scientists are disappearing and they've been following the story for however long, blah, blah, blah. Everybody playing the scientists, they're actors. And they're actors that you can see in other movies. You know, they're actors. And so everybody says, it's just an April Fool's joke. But what a lot of people think is that it's actually plausible deniability, that it was that was really going on, and that this joking episode of Science Report was made to be able to point at, to say, to debunk the theorists, right? To say, you guys just watched that episode of Science Report. Well, it's an April Fool's Day joke. It's not real, right? But the argument goes is that, yes, in the 60s, in 1969, Russia and the U.S. did build effectively an underground base on Mars, which is exactly what Ashid is saying here. Now, it's important to keep in mind that, talk about somebody who's credentialed. This is a guy whose credentials are literally unquestionable.
He's got dementia. He's an old guy.
He's 87. Yeah, right. Yeah, you can go there. Yeah. And I'm sure plenty of people are,
right,
making that kind of claim. But now, as far as like Trump knowing about this and keeping it a secret, here, let me keep reading here. But Ashid insists that Trump is aware of them and that he was, quote, on the verge, end quote, of disclosing their existence. However, the Galactic Federation reportedly stopped him from doing so, saying they wished to prevent mass hysteria since they felt humanity needed to, quote, evolve and reach a stage where we will understand what space and spaceships are, end quote.
Wait. Mm-hmm. So humans are not ready now, but they will be ready when they understand space and spaceships. Now, what does that mean? What do you think that
Bob
means?
Lazar was right, and he has to figure it out how that gravity drive worked. But no, go ahead. What do you got?
No, I'm asking you, what do you think that means? That we need to understand what space and spaceships are. Now, coming from an advanced alien species, what could they mean when they say that to us?
I mean, that's me giving first off, I'm not saying I believe Ashid that any of this is true. In fact, I don't believe that there's like a Galactic Federation. But so I'm kind of letting that out of the bag. But if I were to believe this, understand what space and spaceships are, I think that has something very much to do with higher dimensions of existence. And I think that has a lot to do with a controlling, a honing, a harnessing of one's thought and consciousness, to a degree that either none of us, or at least most of us, just like can't grok, like, or don't understand at this point in time.
That's pretty far out.
Yeah. I almost.
This is like the Star Trek episode with the time traveler.
Oh, with the Traveler.
The Traveler.
Yeah, like where no one has gone before.
Yes.
From Tau Alpha C. Yeah, the idea that space, time, and thought are not the separate things that we believe them to be.
The Next Generation, by the way.
Let's sidebar a little bit. We're having fun here. It's calendar, folks. It's
Merry calendar.
Merry calendar, by the way. It's December 25th. So when this is getting released. Star Trek: The Next Generation. So you and I have been rewatching this. This has been our dinner television. The only time we really watch television at all. We've been rewatching this. Season 1. Now this is something actually over the past 2-3 years. This is kind of a rolling thesis and train of thought that I've been laying out in the varying shows that I do, but also in Sovryn Tech, that most people don't understand. I mean, when, Star Trek, I think most people, and you're a Star Trek fan, Ellen. I mean, you're a hardcore fan.
Oh, this is news to me.
Well, you are. Come on. You've watched it all. I mean, and you love it.
I do love it. I even might have a few costumes.
I was just going to bring those up. And you've worn them in hotel rooms and things have got, well, anyway, sorry, we don't need to go there, but, so, I think most people have the perspective that and let me know if you think this is wrong, that like Gene Roddenberry, that everything you see in Star Trek is all Gene Roddenberry's brainchild, minus Discovery and all that new fan fiction horseshit. But, you know, from the original series, kind of to around Enterprise, I mean, we know Gene Roddenberry died, you know, before like even Deep Space Nine hit the airwaves, but I think most people think that a lot of that is all like, this is all Gene Roddenberry's vision that kind of kept going forward, at least until 2005. Okay. That's not true. Like that's not true at all. In fact, you read the book Astonishing as well, didn't you?
Yes.
A tremendous book. Or wait, Astounding, right?
Astounding, yes.
Astounding. Yeah, that's it. So this is an amazing book, but that talks about like Gene Roddenberry's mission and what he was doing and all this blah, blah, blah. It's a very interesting read. Anyway, bottom line, what most people don't realize is that Gene Roddenberry's involvement in Star Trek wholly consists of season 1 and 2 of the original series. He was not around for season 3. Star Trek the Motion Picture, he was certainly, in fact, that's probably the most he was in control of his baby, in control of Star Trek. And then season 1 and a chunk of season 2. And that's all. None of the other movies, none of that crap. That's all the Star Trek that Gene Roddenberry had any real say in. He had a lot of direct control in season 1. Now, season 1 of The Next Generation and some of season 2, I feel like deals with such wild shit. I mean, big, like multi-dimensional, you know, multiverse, like just massive subjects that show almost completely leaves behind by the time you get to season 3. And it becomes a lot straighter science fiction, you know, and is not dealing with these like when they go with the episode with the Traveler, when they go to like the edge of the galaxy and suddenly like Picard's mom is showing up and all the, you know, all this wild stuff is happening. Or, I mean, they're like, watch season 1 again. If anyone hasn't, watch it again and just consider the scale of what's on the line in every episode and like what wild ideas. This is not hard science fiction. This is dealing in like the fringe science doesn't even begin to describe some of these episodes, in my opinion. But most people don't like season 1, so they don't think about it. But part of the reason I don't think they like it is because like the ideas are so massive, they can't, kind of like what you were saying earlier. Like with Bob Lazar, is that people like reach a point where okay, my mind just can't go there. Right. And I suppose in some ways that's similar to what's being said here by these aliens. And that's kind of how I got on this train of thought, is that, like this, you know, the idea that space, time, and thought, you know, aren't separate things. Star Trek was saying that in season 2, the first episode, in season 2, there's the episode where Picard is describing death. He doesn't say you just go away. He wasn't describing it as an atheist. He's saying, I don't know. He's like, but the universe is so complex. It can't just be that we just die and disappear, there isn't a sky daddy, you know, but it's something else, you know. Go ahead.
He was saying that he thought that you change and go on to a different form of existence. Right.
Again, most Star Trek fans completely ignore that any of these things were ever said in Star Trek, but these are massive. I mean, these are like just the biggest ideas that humanity's ever had in a very real way. So do I think that if I were to believe what Ashid's saying here about what does, you know, evolve and reach a stage where we will understand what space and spaceships are, I think it's pointing at perhaps those sorts of things. How about that?
Okay. So let me turn the conversation in a different direction then.
Okay.
Why would he lie about this? Why do you think that this could potentially not be true?
Oh, now you're getting at a point that I want to get at. I mean, I want to answer that, but I also kind of want to know your answer. What do you think he's saying there about space and spaceships?
Yeah, well, I guess it's sort of in the same vein of what you were talking about. I think that it's more than just what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
When he says space and spaceships, everyone thinks like, oh, of course I know what space is. Mm-hmm. It's the distance between things.
Mm-hmm.
It's the empty space that fills up the distance between me and you.
Right.
Or me and the nearest star. And spaceships are just vehicles that allow us to traverse that space. But I think that the nature of our understanding of these concepts is very narrow-minded and limited to what experiences we have had. And that if we are to understand these things in a new and different light, it's going to take a revolution of science and thought and creativity. I think that there's more going on in the empty spaces between things than people realize. And I don't know what it's going to take to get to that stage where we do understand it, but I think we're just not there yet. And there's something else. There's some other, like, a spaceship isn't just a spaceship.
Yeah. Tell me, you want to tell me more on that?
I don't know how much more I can say. Just that, like, there's a motive power that can move us in the traditional sense, but then there's also the spaceships that we don't understand yet, like the Bob Lazar spaceship. Like, how does that function? That's a totally different level, a different order of magnitude of science than we have achieved.
Yeah.
And I think that there are other levels, not just in science, but in other areas that we haven't achieved yet. I'm
just grinning ear to ear here. I mean, I'm with you. You know, I totally get what you're. I mean, we don't understand it much ourselves, you know, but I get where you're coming from, and I get what you're saying, and I agree that there's a lot. I mean, we have incredibly limited perceptions. We know that. You know, you only need to pick up or connect a FLIR camera to your smartphone to see how limited your fucking perceptions are. You know, so it's not
right.
like it's not like that's not a fact that our perceptions aren't limited.
Yeah, and we can say that now and know that we are biased and we don't see everything. We only see what we want to see or what we've been trained to see. But that doesn't, just having that knowledge and wanting to learn more and see more doesn't make it happen.
Right.
Like, it's going to take a long time for us to be able to wrap our minds around most things that we think of as simple phenomena.
Yeah. So I still want to answer your question as to why would we need to hold on to that. Why would he lie about this? Or why would he say this if he wasn't being truthful? And I want to get to that. I want to read more of the story and then we'll circle back onto that. So, okay. So here we go. As for why he's chosen to reveal this information now, let's talk about what the claim is anyway. Sheed explains that the timing was simply due to how much the academic landscape has changed and how respected he is in academia. Quote, if I had come up with what I'm saying today 5 years ago, I would have been hospitalized, end quote, he explained to Yedjo. He added that, quote, today they're already talking differently. I have nothing to lose. I've received my degrees and awards. I'm respected in universities abroad where the trend is also changing, end quote. Sheed provided more information in his newest book. Now, here's the part that kind of sucks. Like, this would have been a far more credible story if he wasn't schlepping a book. and that's it. So the book is The Universe Beyond the Horizon, Conversations with Professor Hema Sheed. And let's see, he says, along with other details such as how aliens have prevented nuclear apocalypses and, quote, when we can jump in and visit the men in black, end quote. So he's saying there's more, that like aliens have been actively involved in preventing nuclear disasters.
Maybe he knows so much that he had to write a book because it was too much to give in this article.
Mm-hmm. And also it's interesting. He says, when we can jump in and visit the men in black, we need to touch on that. I'll keep going here. There's just a little bit more to the story. While it is unclear if any evidence exists that could support Sheed's claims, they did come just ahead of a recent announcement by Space IL, the group behind Israel's failed attempt to land a spacecraft on the moon in 2019. Uploaded to social media with the text, quote, ready to get excited again, end quote. The announcement contained a 15-second video of the moon with text saying back to the moon, followed by the date of December 9th, 2020. It is likely that this is a follow-up to the I don't know why they even brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, because that kind of discredits this story. Like, these aliens are in contact with Israel, but yet Israel can't even successfully land a craft on the moon.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. And I'm like, that just doesn't make, and it kind of feels like, see, that's where the story gets salesy and in my opinion falls apart. Like, what more money is there to be made than when you put up this, this headline of, hey, supposedly there's a Galactic Federation and one of the top security officials, for the Israeli government basically, claims it. That's enough, I think, to get people to click and for the Jerusalem Post to make some money off of the story. Like, why do you have to go these other distances? It doesn't it doesn't really add any credibility. And again, it just feels like a marketing tactic for the story overall, but that's regardless of any of that. Let's talk a little bit about the Men in Black. Let's say that there were a Galactic Federation. Okay. If there were a Galactic Federation, I feel like there would have to be some kind of not larger body, but higher up body, higher authority than the United States government or the Israeli government that is actually in contact with them. That's why I think it's interesting that he mentions the Men in Black, because that's basically how they get sold. Like in the movies or in the popular conspiracy theories, that they're an organization that kind of exists above everything. And I mean, it's interesting that he goes there, because I cannot fathom that this Galactic Federation, that like Congress people talk to the Galactic Federation, I've known Congress people and they are just other people, they're really not, they're nothing special. In fact, I'd argue they're less than special. They're just really good at lying to people, and
great conversationalists.
Yeah, they're great conversationalists. Absolutely. So that part just but he's making the direct claim that and that somehow Trump was going to reveal it. Like, the idea that there's this Galactic Federation, but then we're still dealing with such petty politics here, and there's just so much of this that doesn't really make any sense to me. Like that we're thinking in such small terms, but we're dealing with an entire gigantic Galactic Federation that is basically telling people on Earth, don't do this, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. It just, none of that makes sense.
Yeah. I can only envision this working if the Galactic Federation has representatives that only speak to the world's leading representatives, not the Congress people or anything like that,
right.
But like the president and his handler, or I'm sorry, I mean like whoever works with him.
Yeah.
And other world powers, other world leaders like Putin or Kim Jong-il or something like that. I don't know. Like, the people who have the weapons of mass destruction, the people who have access to the power to push the button to use those weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Like, that's who they're going for.
Yeah. So
that's the only way that I can envision it working, because if they were to talk to Congress people, there's no way that they could keep this secret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess, why don't we get into, let me ask this. Do you believe him?
It sounds like a science fiction story.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this idea of a Galactic Federation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some elements of truth there, but it's hard for me to swallow.
Yeah. I don't believe him. I think that the notion's like just and why would, I think it's crap. Now, why would he say this? My first theory is actually a conspiracy theory, that being what's known as Project Bluebeam, which I've mentioned on the show in the past.
Wait, so is this the conspiracy about the second coming that's going to be faked?
That's that could be part of it. So basically you had this guy who in France is actually very famous. He was almost like the Alex Jones of France. He's been dead for a long time now, but Serge Monast, in 1994, he came out with this whole book about it called, Project Bluebeam, where he claims, and where he got that information, You know, it's like, okay. But the theory makes some sense, and B, there's a lot of independent research that existed before Project Bluebeam was even given a name or laid out there by Serge Monast that plays well with this overarching theory. And the overarching theory is that either the U.S. government or governments around the world, you know, he was big on the New World Order and other nonsense. His theory was that they were going to experiment with like holograms, you know, and lasers and everything, and fake that governments were going to fake aliens coming to Earth so that they could create a one world government, so that people would unite under this, you know, under the banner of humanity, either, you know, as friends to the aliens or maybe even against. And a lot of people want to bring up the speech that Ronald Reagan gave when he was president about how different he thinks things would be if some alien invader came, and how quickly we would unite as a species. You know, and a lot of people kind of point at that and say, well, maybe he was getting everybody ready. Like that was, you know, what's the term? Programming.
Preparing people?
Yeah, preparing them. But anyway, just preparing.
Predictive programming?
Yeah, yes, predictive programming to get them ready for, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. And now some people want to say that with Project Bluebeam that they would actually mimic the second coming of Christ, which, not outlandish. Like that, in my opinion, that'd be a good trick to pull.
But then everybody is going to be left on planet Earth. And what happens to all of these religions and people who think like we were supposed to be taken up in the rapture?
See, that's the problem, is that the New Testament is really squishy. It's very, very squishy. And a lot of its prophecies are just remixes and yanked from the Old Testament. Okay. It has very little of its own shtick. And it's squishy in the sense that, like, most people don't realize that interpretations of the book of Revelation, you have three, and that's just the major ones. You have three major ones. You have premillennial, millennial, and postmillennial, suggesting that, you know, and depending upon which, you know, you can back up any of these three, but they all have wildly different timelines. Like for one of those, you have a pre-tribulation rapture that occurs, and then people have to live here through the tribulation. For another group, it's, oh no, you know, you don't, you know, everybody, the day of judgment is the same for everybody. There is no pre-tribulation rapture, all that's crap. And then you have people who, I mean, and actually the Catholic Church, who are the millennialists, I guess you would say, they would say that we're already living in, you know, like Christ is already kind of, I mean, he's going to come back, yes, but we're already living in a lot of the events of the book of Revelation, and that the church is Christ's presence on earth, right? That's an oversimplification of what they think. But point being is that there are plenty of ways that you could interpret New Testament exegesis, as it would be called, to where it, you know, the idea of like a holographic Jesus coming down and ruling, you know, would fit the interpretation. And so, but actually, you know, what would happen here with Project Bluebeam is that it wouldn't really be Jesus. It's just a hologram, and he's just the mouthpiece for the New World Order, and they enslave everybody, you know. It's a pretty good trick, and it would probably work pretty well because, I mean, not just because most people are stupid, but most people are so, I mean, a lot of people are cultural Christians to where they're so, it's so ingrained, like to have a response to, you know, to Christ imagery. I mean, just look how happy people are about Christmas, you know, that, yeah, I don't think it would be a hard sell. I've read, and my point was saying that like, this might be part of Project Bluebeam is that, and this was another interesting book that I'd read recently by a guy named Nick Redfern, who I don't agree with 20% of the time. But he had a very interesting book about, it's his latest one, I think, about the Rendlesham Forest incident, which is kind of the Roswell incident of Britain. And his book makes an excellent case, which includes work from previous books, including books that were written in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that he's really suggesting that the Rendlesham Forest incident wasn't a UFO at all. It was Project Bluebeam, that like there were drugs used, like LSD. There were all kinds of elements used to make people believe that they saw a UFO, but they didn't. And he pulls at like these, what he claims were experiments done on like a French town, I think in the 50s.
Oh, like everybody the entire town was poisoned?
Yeah, and the argument goes is actually the whole fucking town was given LSD, and they all thought they were seeing all kinds of wacky shit in town. The whole fucking town. And this happened. Now, I mean, whether or not it was LSD, I mean, the claim, I think the real world claim is, or the official story, as it were, is that it was some kind of like problem with the local bread. Where the yeast created some kind of
the ergot fungus,
something like that. Yes. So that's kind of the claim, but even people people don't buy it, and it's not just people like Nick Redfern's, like the ancient alien types or anything like that, or conspiracy theorists. There are plenty of people who are actually part of the local government that are just like, no, that doesn't make any fucking sense, to say that it was that. So the idea that governments have been working on how do you trick people, into believing whatever we want them to see? It's kind of a similar situation to that's far more plausible and provable than kind of like earlier with Bob Lazar than saying, okay, the spaceship's from Zeta Reticuli. No, maybe it's just something from an ancient civilization. Right. And so this is why I get bothered with the idea of aliens, because as soon as you toss aliens into the mix, like rationality goes out the door, in my opinion, with any of these conversations, when there may be very rational explanations as to what's going on or as to what's being attempted. So why do I think that he came out and said this? Yeah, I believe Project Bluebeam. And I think that that's actually a very real thing. If not in name, certainly in concept. And I think there's been plenty, including with the Russians and so on, that they've attempted this sort of thing. So, but that's one theory. I don't know, what do you got? What do you think about Project Bluebeam? Perhaps. What do you think about?
Well, it certainly sounds like one crazy conspiracy theory. I don't know what to say. I mean, I haven't done the research. I haven't done the reading. I guess it's plausible that, like, a town's water supply could easily be poisoned by one guy with a lot of drugs. Just pour him in there, and the whole town is more susceptible to suggestion. But I don't know. I guess I think it is believable, is very plausible that this story has been planted by world powers. Somebody with influence is having this guy who is very reputable, has an awesome reputation. You can't refute. I mean, he did security for like 30 years or whatever. Him saying this is very believable.
Right.
Because he has had access to high powers and secret information. Of course, when people hear this coming from his mouth, it's much more believable. But I could believe that there's some sort of agenda behind this. I don't know. I don't claim to know what the agenda is, and I'm not going to like really put forth anything except that like it is believable that people are being prepared by some sort of governing force for this, I guess, conglomeration of power. I don't know how to say it. Like power becoming more centralized. In response to an alien threat, or even like if the aliens are working with humanity, we need to like come together and work together like never before and achieve world peace so that we can achieve this level of intelligence, this level of technology, so that we can be ready for space and space travel and spaceships.
But that's saying that what he's saying is accurate, that like there is a Galactic Federation and that we're getting prepped for it.
Well, I'm saying that I think it's plausible that story could have been made up so that humans are more likely to buy into this whatever changes are coming that is going to help us achieve this new level of technology. I'm not saying that it even necessarily has to be real, just that it is believable enough.
Okay, so
to achieve the changes that whatever governing power wants to see happen.
Okay, so you're saying that, yes, this would be part of a plan to centralize power on planet Earth.
It could be.
It could be. Okay. Yeah, because, so, I mean, as much as you've been on the show in 2020, again, it was a joke. I mean, it's true, but it's kind of a running joke that you're on whenever we talk about aliens. There have been that many stories in 2020 that I have considered that it's not Art Bell, and it's no disrespect to Art Bell. It's not Art Bell kind of stuff. Okay. It's not coast to coast AM kind of fare. It's, military personnel saying, pilots saying, I saw this, like we covered the UAP story.
Right. And that was very official. That was there was evidence for that.
Mm-hmm. And you have, a sheet here saying that, look, in the halls of academia, the opinion's changing. And that's actually the guy who was reporting on the UAPs is basically saying, he was saying we have to get past where we can't even like theorize, or we can't even suggest this sort of thing. According to a sheet, that's actually happening. We are getting past that point. Which
is good, because we need to, especially in academia, open up the realm of possibility of what is able to be studied.
I agree. So, but you have that, I mean, and that those stories made the rounds, including on Sovryn Tech. There have been plenty of stories just in 2020 alone. There is the creation of the Space Force. There is very clear, I mean, in my opinion, there's a very clear, I don't always believe in predictive programming, and a lot of times it can be very much debunked, but this really does feel like but someone is setting up the planet for some kind of bullshit, right? Much like you were saying. Now, is it going to be like real aliens? I don't think so. Because again, nothing about that makes sense. That like somehow, like, especially if he's claiming that the aliens have stopped nuclear disasters and all this other stuff. Could they help us with COVID-19? Could they, like, what's the pick and choose here? Unless these aliens are fucking unethical as shit, I mean, you have you have UFOologists who come out and say that, oh yeah, there's aliens all over the solar system, but they're galactic slave traders, and we're the slaves. And so, like, is it going to be something really bad?
Or is it just that they want us to follow our own path of evolution, and they only step in when we're about to wipe ourselves out? And they don't see COVID-19 as a real threat to our existence.
I mean, I wish they'd tell us that. Give like a reality check, maybe. I'm not saying that it's the reality, but give a reality check to people to say, hey, you know what? COVID-19 isn't the end of your species.
Well, you know what? If you were to look at the data, you would realize that. I mean, like the mortality rate is there. It's definitely there. But the vast, vast majority of people survive it. That's the facts.
Wow, I just lost all my sponsors.
I'm not saying that it's not unpleasant, but like it's not going to kill 50% of the population.
Yeah, right.
It's just not.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with you.
So while it is a threat in the sense that the government is responding disproportionately and causing people to lose their sources of income, and it's radically changing the way that we live our lives with all of these restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
But the illness itself is not going to wipe us out. If anything, it's the long-term effects of the economic fuckery that the government is perpetrating on us.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy. Wow. There it is. I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked on this, but I'm going to put this out, and it's not like this isn't public stuff. So I do PR work, and I work with multiple medical professionals who hold very high positions, at least in the United States. And, yeah, they come right. And I know because I'm the one editing their fucking PR copy, and they come right out and write that, the flu is still killing more people than COVID-19 is, you know? And because in fact, it was a funny thing because oh man, see, it's like the things that you're comfortable saying and not that I'm uncomfortable saying it.
And you shouldn't even be uncomfortable
No,
stating
I'm not,
the facts, but this is such a polarizing issue.
I know. And, but you know, I have listeners of this show that are across the spectrum. Okay. And I'm not telling anybody what to do, how to act, how to react, whatever. I'm not getting in, you know, necessarily getting into that. I'm just saying that like, and I've brought this up before. Okay. Let me just say this because again, it's a public quote. So I'm not like worried about NDAs, you know, or anything along these lines, but basically I'll say that when it was getting written up, it was written up in such a way to suggest that COVID-19 was somehow deadlier. I think it was said, or just the flu. Like it was saying COVID-19 or just the flu. And the edit was instantly corrected by the medical professionals to say, oh, no, don't say just the flu because more people die from the flu than COVID-19. And this was not like something from earlier in the year. This is incredibly recent. Okay. It's such a mess. And I hate, like the one thing I want everybody to agree on, not, you know, the mask stuff, all that crap, whatever. The one thing I want everybody to agree on is that the news media or that the media is absolutely thriving and wanting you to be positively terrified, and not for the reasons of your safety. It's for the reasons of them getting clicks. Because if they were remotely honest, they would never publish a single number about the United States as a whole, as far as the death tolls and as far as the spread and effects of COVID-19. That's just dishonest, because what they do is they take that number of however many millions or hundreds of thousands of people in the United States, right? They take that number and then they compare it to Estonia. Rhode Island's the size of Estonia. Like if you're going to compare the US to what's happening in other countries that are apparently doing it better, and some of them are. Trump's a fucking moron. Like I have no problem saying that. Okay. You need to compare by size and by population per capita. You don't compare. The United States is huge. The United States is the size of 20 countries around the world. Like saying that the United States is fucking up, you know, because it has such a high number, and comparing it to fucking Estonia or even Britain or something like that is an outright lie. I mean, like that's just pure dishonesty of numbers, you know, because, you know, this isn't apples and oranges here.
Yeah, and there are even further segments that you could do, like what is the age range of these people? What is their level of obesity? You know, like level of activity. What is their diet like?
Yeah.
All of these different categories that would give you more specific and useful information.
Yeah. So these are nasty tactics that not just the news organizations themselves, but also supposed experts are engaging in, that are ugly. And honestly,
not the experts are ugly. The tactics are ugly, right?
Well, the experts might be ugly too. You know, I mean, politics is show business for ugly people.
Yeah,
so
Fauci looks like an elf. So.
Oh, for fuck's sake, that guy. Anyway, that actually brings it full circle here, is that, you know, the media loves this kind of shit and hypes this kind of shit up, and experts love to, you know, any kind of wild ass stuff that they can get out there, because it is just show business for ugly people. And this guy's not fucking immune to it. You know, it's like all these celebrities claiming that they're getting COVID. You know, I don't know how true any of that is. I mean, people get COVID. COVID exists. And I'm not debating that. Okay. I'm just saying that I think a lot of these celebrities are wanting to catch COVID because their movies aren't out in theaters right now. And they're such fucking prima donnas, you know, like their ego's not getting stroked enough. So I'll come out and say, oh, I have COVID. You know, I mean, it's just like how people would go into rehab and then they get on the cover of People magazine, you know, 6 months later and, hey, I fucked up and I'm better now. You know, I mean, that's all fucking show business, because these people just want the fucking attention because they're goddamn attention whores. And I hate to use the word whores in a pejorative sense, but they're attention whores. And guys like this, no different. But do I think that there might be kind of an overarching plan here? Sure. That it's something related to, Project Bluebeam or whatever, and that the media is getting you prepped so that varying powers get to take advantage of this kind of situation. Sure, because the same exact fucking thing's happening with COVID. That's not saying COVID isn't real. That's just saying there are people taking advantage of this. Like, my personal opinion, I mean, what the fuck? We're laying all this shit out. Let's lay it out, huh?
Lay it out.
My personal opinion is that in California, the reason that the lockdowns are nonstop in California is because and I talked about this actually when COVID first kind of became, a hotter topic in this country earlier in the year. I think in a lot of areas, it is all about consolidate. I think that there's a heavy lobby to consolidate businesses. They basically want to, a lot of businesses, not governments necessarily, but businesses want to put mom and pop shops out of business and just swoop in and buy all that shit up. I mean, this is a dream environment for conglomerates to just like soak up more and more and more business and more real estate and everything.
Amazon.
That company's winning right and left with this situation. So I think there's a very powerful lobby, around that. But regardless.
And
anyway.
I just want to put this out there that there is a very small chance that what this article is saying is true.
That there's a galactic federation.
Yes, and
okay.
I just want to put this out to the universe that if there is a galactic federation, we're ready. Take us.
Well, let's bring it around. All right. Yeah. and I'm with you on that. Okay. So I reviewed this book. This is crazy. This episode's going to tank the show.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're really not this crazy.
No. We're I don't know. We had a little too much eggnog or something. I don't know. There's something in the Yule log. I don't know what it was. No. So I reviewed this book a little while back by Joseph Bloomrich, who also heavily credentialed, all the credentials in the world that you need. Worked for JPL, all over the place, NASA. You're consummate rocket scientist, and he wrote a book called The Spaceships of Ezekiel. You can find, because all my content is out now for free. This stuff used to be behind a paywall. But you can find my book review of The Spaceships of Ezekiel. I think that Joseph Bloomrich's work was top-notch historical research. And his argument is that like what you see in Ezekiel, or what's being described in Ezekiel chapter 1 of the Old Testament, or of Torah, as my people would call it, was actually a spaceship. That's his claim. And I think his evidence stands pretty tall, and his argument stands pretty tall. That if that book was in any way documenting something that actually happened, that's how it went down.
Well, didn't he also say that the temple, the directions for the temple that he was building, like, would perfectly house this spaceship?
The ship, yes, yeah. And speaking of like what Bob Lazar was talking about, the idea that there was like old spaceships laying around, I can totally believe that. But that it was, maybe one of these, like what Joseph Bloomrich was writing about, and like I could kind of.
We're making connections here.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Look, I understand if you want to change topic from the alien spaceship thing. We don't have to go forward with this anymore. We can just stop it right here and save face.
Yeah, but it's, I see at the same time, like, thank you. Okay. First off, But at the same time, I think this is what people listen to me for. You know,
the really crazy outlandish series.
Yeah. And you know what? Not outlandish, but well researched. Like that's
you do the research that nobody else wants to do.
Thank you. So, and thank you for saying that coming from you, but also like I've gotten this from a lot of people, especially lately. They're like, Brian, we know there's roads you don't want to go down, but go down them because we know you do your research. That's exactly what they say. They're like, this is their exact words. And I've heard this from many, many people as late. They said, we know you do the research. Go there. Go ahead and say it because we know you're not just talking out of your ass. Okay. Because for a long time on this show, especially as like I try to court sponsors or whatever, I mean, now
You've come to a realization that courting sponsors just isn't the way to go.
No, you know what? Because you can't really get sponsors. And also, if any sponsor ever came to me and said, yeah, but what you just said about aliens, we can't sponsor your show. Sorry, that's nuts. If those people got offered a sponsor slot for Joe Rogan, they'd take that in a heartbeat. And Joe Rogan has fucking nut jobs on his show, and he doesn't do jack shit for research. Okay, and then that's fine. If he wants to have me on, I'll gladly call him out right on air because, you know, he's a good conversationalist. But we also said in this episode how that doesn't necessarily mean that someone is on the up and up, honest, or worthwhile listening to, regardless. Okay.
He's a good interviewer.
Yep, he's a good interviewer. Great. Okay, that is by no means that his show should be listened to in any way, shape, or form. But regardless, he has absolute nut jobs on his show. They have no evidence whatsoever, have not done the research. I've heard it plenty of times, and I've heard them. And yet, there's not a sponsor on the planet that wouldn't jump on his show. And he could name the cost, and they'd pay it. So that's crap. You know, just tell me you don't like me, and you know, and that's why you're not a sponsor, and that's fine. All right, like I can accept that. You know, I'm okay with that. But don't give me any other crap. Like, sure as fuck don't lie to me about and say like, well, your numbers aren't enough. Are you fucking kidding me? This is one of the, I don't want to say it's one of the biggest podcasts on the planet, but it's got better numbers than probably 90% of podcasts on the planet have. Okay. And if this is the hot fucking medium in the world today, this is a place you should be. Whatever. I'm not going to please them. And that we're getting way off a subject here. Okay. So I'm going to dive. I'm going to go down the road. All right. The first quarter of Torah. Okay. Larry, let me start off with this. I think that there is at least one organization on the planet that knows the truth around what we call the Bible, like that knows what it really is. Okay. And that what it's really saying, what really happened, blah, blah, blah. I think that there is perhaps a secret Judaism, as it were. Now I've had you read, what do they call it now? The Hiram Key Revisited, right?
Yes.
This is a book that does a pretty good job. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job of exploring this idea that, well, you can see this thread throughout Judaism, even Christianity, throughout varying religions of this very similar vein of ideas that exist, right? And they go to Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, but then they go back from that. It's a tremendous book. It really is, even if it's not totally accurate. So, I think, and I've also reviewed, and you can find these reviews, the work of Ahmed Osman, who I think is fantastic. Okay. He has a point that basically all of, Israelite history up to the time of King David, or from King David back, is actually Egyptian history. And they just changed the names. Okay. Now there's evidence that, because we know that, within Torah itself, that they lost the books. Okay. They lost, the books of Moses and everything. The Bible must have, and I've talked about this many times before. So anyway, if people have specific questions, they can email me and get in touch with me about it. So I firmly believe that most of, is the history of Israel from David back is actually just Egyptian names screwed up. I believe that. Okay. Going from there, now you get past that. Okay. And you get into the times of, Ezekiel, Isaiah, these characters and all this, which is where things get interesting, like with the spaceships of Ezekiel. Now, those are more like, okay, this is, the Israelites, these are the Hebrews, and this is actually getting into more like actual documented history at that stage. And it's interesting because at that stage is when you can start finding artifacts of this of this point of history. It actually goes a little bit earlier than that, but that's a fine place to go. I'm trying to be brief with this. So everything before then, basically like, when you look at Torah in Judaism, it's actually ordered differently than when you look at it as the Old Testament in the Christian Bible, but regardless. So the first half, let's just put it simply, the first half of the Old Testament of Torah is bullshit. Or it's not bullshit. It happened, but all the names are wrong. Everything's wrong on it. And it's actually Egyptian history. And there are easy parallels that you can point at that's what it is. Within that includes like Levitical law and all these other things. Now, okay, I don't believe that there are aliens, but I do believe that there are ancient civilizations on Earth that were wildly advanced. Okay, wildly advanced. Could they have built the supposed spaceships of Ezekiel? Or what Bob Lazar claims to have found? Yeah, I could very easily believe that. And, we could talk about the Mana Machine. I definitely recommend people, like read up on that. That's a very interesting subject. The idea that, some very advanced technology that created space food effectively, was getting hauled out of Egypt. And again, when you read Ahmed Osman's work and you look and there's some others as well, the idea that actually even when you're reading about Moses, that's all Egyptian history, it creates a very clear picture. I'm just going to cut to the chase. I hate doing this. I usually like to spend a ton of time explaining everything, but I'll just cut to the chase on it. I think that Levitical law, that like Torah and all that stuff, while a lot of that is actually Egyptian history, it was even things that they were carrying down. And I think that the Egyptians were effectively carrying down and this might, again, this is, now it's a theory of mine. Okay. It's a theory. I guess I should be clear on that because it's a tougher one to prove. I think that much of Torah is actually a manual for that spaceship and for how to survive in outer space when flying through outer space.
Wow. So what, do you have examples?
Like a lot of some of the medical knowledge kind of laid out in it. I mean, so here's the other complex part of this is that now like Kabbalists, okay, in Judaism, they very clearly state that the words in Torah and like the characters, just like the characters as in like the Hebrew letters, the characters are out of order. And if you knew the order, you'd be able to do amazing things. And so again, I'm trying to be, because we're getting on 2 hours here. I'm trying to be pretty brief, and I know people are going to beg for me to explain more, and I will. Okay, at some point, I'll get into this, but I basically think that Torah is like a Starfleet survival manual. That the Egyptians kind of carried down from a civilization that also happened to build the spaceships of Ezekiel, and I think there are people out there who know this. And if, Ashid might, I don't think that they're part of any Galactic Federation. If anything, they're just ancient humans or something that evolved on this planet. I could see that there are people who think that they know about like some galactic government, or that they know about like that there's some kind of like, I don't know, something out there, at least in our solar system, that's calling some shots or whatever, or that there's like a space fleet, things of these ideas, I mean, all these kinds of ideas, but that's the origin of all that. Is someone found maybe one of Ezekiel's spaceships, like maybe that's Roswell, and that part of the reason that all these things have been held on to for so long have to do, I mean, actually we joked about it, but as much as I think Zecharia Sitchin is wrong about a lot of things, And I firmly believe, especially about like aliens coming down and all this crap. The idea that why is Jerusalem so fucking important in history? Like, what is the big deal? Why do you feel like you have to own that if you are going to be the power that exists on Earth? Of course, Sitchin in the Book of Enki, like we were talking about, he talks about how Jerusalem was effectively an ancient spaceport, where, ships would take off from and all this other crap. And any attempt to create a logical reason why the fuck Jerusalem matters so much, I think is worth exploring, because people seem to generally ignore it, or ignore the question. Like, really, why does this matter so much? Like, okay, fine, it's the holy site of God, but it shouldn't matter that much. Come on, God's everywhere. Haven't we gotten to that point yet? There's got to be something more. And the idea that there is this sort of secret religion that's always been kind of traveling down throughout history and knows this to some degree. I can imagine that Ashid might somehow be, like a part of that, involved in that, and that could be an aspect of this. Wild stuff, I know. Saying that basically, you could say I watched too much Star Trek or something. Saying that Torah is effectively a Starfleet manual once you figure out what it's actually saying. I get it that sounds absolutely crazy, or that the spaceships of Ezekiel are real, or things like this. But again, no one's claiming aliens here. I'm coming at this from the idea that it's something that existed a long time ago, and some people carried down throughout time, or at least some knowledge of it. And that's what I've got. So there, I went all the way. That's not all the way, but that's a good distance to go down.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a much bigger conversation that we could have around that.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe for a different show.
Yeah, because I want to talk about fake meat, but no.
Yeah, I do too, actually. You brought up the mana machine. And
yes! Wow, amazing how this themes. Yes. Right. So the mana machine, very quick, is the theory that and this also speaks to Kabbalah because it's in the book of Zohar, and of course in the Old Testament, that the what gave the Israelites manna when they were going their 40 years through the desert, leaving, after the Exodus, leaving Egypt, was actually a highly advanced device that, in the whole, where the Sabbath comes from, it was the one day of the week you had to clean the fucking machine.
Which essentially was a bioreactor that grew algae.
Right. Yes, exactly. Which is what we theorize today would be a great space food for our astronauts. And that's something that's being, developed to this day. And I think the mana machine is part and parcel of this subject, like Spaceships of Ezekiel, the mana machine. And it's not uninteresting that these are books that are wildly out of print. And you think they wouldn't be, but for most of them, you have to pay a pretty penny to get your hands on them. That lay out a lot of the evidence around this. So anyway, the mana machine was about making space food. Why don't we talk about space food? So we basically suggested that this guy is either part of a secret religious cult, or that it's Project Bluebeam. But let's talk about meat. All right. We're just going to change it up. Hard shift to another story that we had that I know you were very interested to talk about, Ellen.
Yes, which you said at the beginning of the show could potentially tie into technologies that could be useful in space.
Yes, I think this would be, because how do you solve that? How do you feed people in space? How do you feed people on Mars? When everybody seems to be planning to go there and already have their governments in place because, we need more government in this solar system. No, we don't. But thanks, Elon. Anyway, this story, here we go. Here's the headline from Bloomberg Green. Lab-grown meat is getting closer to supermarket shelves. And this is from December 9th, 2020. So this is the day before Ashid's big announcement about the Galactic Federation. I don't know if this is a technology that they gave to us. No.
Oh, no. So this technology, I think, just kind of came to fruition a few years ago.
Yeah.
Where scientists are finally able to grow tissues from single cells in petri dishes, essentially.
Right. So slaughter-free meat. And I don't know how much we need to even really get into the story.
There's not much of a story here.
No. It is very short, actually. But the bottom line is that it's so Singapore they've made it legal to sell what do they call it? Cultured meat. That's
Yes.
basically lab grown meat. They are allowing for the sale of cultured meat. Now it's expensive as fuck. I mean, we're talking anywhere from the hundreds to thousands of dollars. I don't know what it's going to look like when it actually ends up on the shelves in Singapore. But at present, it has the issue of, scaling in the economy.
Right.
Go ahead.
So this article essentially says that it's getting closer to shelves in supermarkets and restaurants.
Right.
But it's not there yet because it is so expensive. But with economies of scale, the price per unit will go down. So eventually this will become more of a viable alternative to meat.
Right. So it's not a question of whether it's feasible. It's just when. Like, when is it going to be on the shelf? That is the only question. So they're making statement of fact, lab grown meat is going to be on the shelf. It's going to be a possibility that's going to be available to you. I want to open it up asking you the question. And if you have other points to make, obviously get them in. I want to ask you the question: would you eat this? Would you? I mean, we're known as, we're plant based, right? We're vegetarian, and is this something? Because I could see the argument that this resolves a lot of ethical concerns for people who, for a lot of people, they're vegetarian, vegan, or plant based because they disagree with the way that animals are, farmed, treated. This eliminates that entire equation, that entire part of it. Like the ethics kind of go out the door here, or are they're not applicable. Would you eat this?
So this is a really fascinating technology.
Go. Look, lead away, my
This
dear.
would not be exciting if I just said no straight up.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about it first.
You are a podcast professional. You do it. You take the story where you want it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a really fascinating technology. I'll start out just by saying that.
Yeah.
I'm all in favor of lab technologies improving the way that we eat and offering people more choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you said is a really good point, is something I've been thinking about recently too. That for people who are just vegetarian because of the way that the moral implications of the way that animals are raised and slaughtered, this does eliminate the animal cruelty perspective,
right?
Or it eliminates the animal cruelty from the equation. And also, it's an ultra pure product. There's no, the cow isn't living in this clustered and dirty environment its entire life, being stressed out and bored and sprayed with antibiotics and pumped full of growth hormone. Well, I don't know actually what sort of hormones they use to stimulate the growth of the cells. So I guess I can't say that for sure. But I do know that in a lab environment, it's a very clean environment. They have to maintain a sterile environment in order to ensure a pure product.
Right.
So this is going to be higher quality than meat that you would get from Walmart or something, or just from your average grocery store. Now, if you want real meat, if you're really worried about the lab grown perspective, maybe you're somebody who buys grass-fed beef or all organic or free range. Those are the kind of terms that you look for with your food. So I don't know, maybe there will be studies that show what the difference is nutritionally between this kind of meat and a real animal.
Right.
Per se. I think that for people who don't eat meat because they believe that from an evolutionary perspective, the human digestive tract is not built to handle meat, this isn't going to change anything for those people. They're not going to eat it.
Yeah. So if you're on a plant-based diet because you consider that to be the healthiest option, and the optimal option for the human being, Like, this isn't going to change anything for those people, right?
Right, and I would consider myself one of those people. I think that plant-based diets have a lot of evidence, an overwhelming amount of evidence, that they are the healthiest, they lead to the best nutrition, longest lives, and fewest digestive issues.
Right.
And also, like, long-term issues that have nebulous beginnings, like cancer or heart disease, things like that. People who live plant-based, people who lead lives that have,
plant-based diet,
a plant-based central diet, they don't have nearly as high of incidence of these illnesses as people who consume meat. So I just feel like this isn't going to change anything for me. I'm not going to eat this. But there are vegetarians in the world who eat things like the Impossible Burger or Beyond Beef that might consider this as an option because they're just not eating meat because of the animal cruelty part.
Right.
But again, like it might change things for some people, but I think for like average Americans who don't really care where their meat comes from, they just want meat. Like people who eat from McDonald's or whatever, like I could see McDonald's or other fast food chains eventually switching over to this, because this, I think, someday will actually become not only better for the environment but also cheaper. Someday.
Yeah, I mean, because that's certainly not now. So,
but the thing is, like, most people now might be freaked out by the idea of lab-grown meat, but there's really nothing to be freaked out about.
Well, it's
the same muscle tissue.
Right. So if you're freaked out about McDonald's, like, or if you're not freaked out about what you eat at McDonald's or most fast food places, you have no reason to be freaked out about this. Like, because though that meat in your McDouble is practically a lab experiment in itself. Okay. It's barely meat.
There's like cows from 20 different countries. There's soybeans. There's wood shavings.
Yeah.
Who knows what kind of chemicals to make it smell good.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, like this would be a far better option for McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
I think you raised an interesting point, and I know off air you were saying this. I don't want to take credit for this point. Like this could be helpful for people who do generally perhaps buy meat at like Walmart or wherever, and they're usually getting lower quality stuff, as to where this doesn't have to be put together like your average hot dog is in a bar rest 99-cent package, right? So, okay. And I mean, the problem there though is that it's probably going to be a long time. We don't know, but it's going to be a while before it's at that price to where, it is cost effective. To where it's cost effective to do that. But there's an argument to be made that like Beyond Burger or Impossible Burger, I mean, those are two different companies.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made that their environmental impact is higher. That they are actually, because of the lab process and the entire process that it goes through, it's analogous to the idea that somehow Teslas are better for the environment when no, they're not. The entire production process from the battery and so on is actually far worse than the highly efficient internal combustion engine, along with the relatively efficient process of, like refining oil and so on, is actually.
Well, so like internal combustion engines are only like 20% efficient. And you have to be careful with how. So I hear what you're saying, that like the process of developing a battery is very pollutive. Mm-hmm. Yes. That doesn't mean that internal combustion engines are great. But to go back to the comparison that you're trying to draw, you have to be careful when you're talking about Beyond Beef and Impossible Burger. Those are two very different companies with different philosophies.
Yes.
But so Beyond Beef is just it's like reconstituted vegetable proteins and different ingredients that are cooked in such a way that the taste and texture are very much like real meat. The Impossible Burger actually uses genetically modified yeast to produce heme, which is the molecule that like carries oxygen in our blood, which they use in their burger to make it taste more like meat. So one is GMO, one is not. But they are both highly processed vegetable matter.
Right.
Which means that they can't be, by their very nature, high in nutrition. Like, maybe they're high in macronutrients, like protein and fat.
Yeah, which they push the protein on the packaging all the time.
Right. Mm-hmm. But they don't retain the nutritional content, the vitamins and minerals that were originally in the vegetables.
Right.
Those are wiped out.
Right. Okay. So not like the best food. I mean...
Right. But you could make the argument that because they're plant-based, because you don't have to go through the process of raising and slaughtering the animals, that they're better for the environment. Yeah, so yes, and I should correct myself on the internal combustion engine. Efficient, wrong word. I meant reliable. Over the long term, definitely.
Yes, yeah. So that's a very different thing. And that actually leads to, this is a term, I know it's not exactly new, but it's definitely reaching a more of a fever pitch. And I can say this as someone who's in PR and that actually works with green, what you would call green clients, clients that care about, the environment or whatever else. Anyway, they use the term sustainability now. Okay.
Which sustainability has been a big thing for like the past 10 years. But yeah, definitely over the last couple of years, it's been more on the public's mind.
Yes. So but here's the thing. I see the term sustainability like the term climate change. Okay. Where there were terms beforehand that I think may have actually been more accurate, but then they want a big tent term they being whatever company or government wants to take advantage. They want some kind of like big tent term to toss in. So because climate change wasn't the word we used to use. Me growing up, it was always global warming. Even though before I was born, it was global cooling. And then it became global warming for 20 some odd years or whatever.
It depends on what part of the planet you're talking about.
Well, that's true.
Warmed or cooled.
Sure. Bottom line being is that they changed the term because the evidence at the time, and this would have been in the aughts, the evidence at the time did not support the narrative of global warming because things were getting colder. They changed the term to climate change. That way it could basically mean anything. Well, it might be cooling, might be heating. We don't know. Like it could be whatever. And I feel like sustainability is a term that's getting tossed in now, or that's being used to replace ecology, environmentalist, green, all these other things, because now it becomes what is not necessarily what is best for the environment, because what's best for the environment, you can come up with some pretty extreme responses. And also they fit the evidence and they're like not wrong if you, if you're buying into this concept of environmentalism, right?
I think I know where you're going with that. And yeah, we're not going to talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Right. So yeah, we've gone plenty of distances this show. We don't have to go there. All right. But point being is that sustainability, I feel like, is a term now that normally you would think absolutely refers to more veganism, that refers more to like environmental solutions and so on. Sustainability can include this concept, okay, and it feels like a bit of a bait and switch, where this is something that is getting pushed out there as an environmentally friendly alternative. But I think a lot of people who buy into environmentalism would want to call horseshit on this because, they're still coming, they might even be coming from a stronger ethical perspective of that. Well, no, because then this should still, because it's not a living animal, like at all.
The cells are alive, but there is it's only muscle tissue. There is no central nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
There's no brain. There's no body, really. It's just a tissue. It's not even a full organ.
How could a vegan argue against this other than the health, like the matter of health?
Well, that's the thing is like, it's only a matter of, so for a person who does not eat meat because they believe that humans evolved to eat a vastly plant-based diet, there's no really good argument against eating this except that it is meat.
Uh-huh.
And like humans' digestive systems aren't aren't made for that. They're not optimized for that.
Yeah.
But there might be an argument that like the lab environment itself, the sterilized environment, like what it takes to create that, there is a lot of energy, a lot of processes that go into that. Like you have to have HEPA filters, and you have to like have a clean room, and like all of these disposable items to ensure that the environment is constantly sterile. Because if you get like mold or bacteria in your cultures, then your culture is wasted.
Yeah.
So like to sustain that level of sterility to grow this stuff in a lab, like, yeah, that takes a lot of waste.
Right.
But
right.
I don't know that there are any studies that show like what's that level of waste versus all of the food that it takes to feed the cows, all of the methane that the cows are producing, like all of the antibiotics that are used on them, like the dirty water that is running off of these farms.
Right.
Just stuff like that.
So
I don't know what the comparison is to like what the energy input is versus what the waste output is.
Yeah, it's not a big enough industry yet, I think, to really know. So there's that. But that environmentalist argument could come up, right? Yeah, I could see that. I mean, so a couple things. And I guess admittedly, I do kind of wonder how exactly this would work. And that's of course why I love having someone far smarter than me around, that being you. And so, well, one, I'm glad that it would seem to be impossible that we'll end up in the Soylent Green future where meat is like a rare thing, and like only for the elites or something like that. Right. And I say that, half in jest. The other part to this. So there are like part of the reason that I am a vegetarian or that my diet is plant-based. Okay. Not just because you do a lot of the cooking and you're plant-based, but I have been very strongly convinced against certain types of meat that it is playing with fire to eat them. Horse meat, chickens. I mean, those are the first two that come to my mind. I've always, even when I was a meat eater, have had an issue with, because there are certain animals on this planet that I consider to be sapient. I consider them to be conscious, and like I won't eat elephants. I'm not going to eat monkeys. I'm not going to
do pigs
eat
fall in
dolphins.
that category?
I generally would stay away. Eventually I was convinced of pigs, and I would stay away from pork. That's not because, I mean, most of my life I didn't eat pork anyway because I am Jewish, but I don't practice that, but anyway.
Well, pigs are said to be very intelligent.
Yes. Yeah. So eventually I got to the point where I'm like, okay. Like the pigs are probably in that number, just like cephalopods are as well. Corvids, right. Like crows. They're another one that I consider in that number, and that's due to their sapience, and that's out of respect to, that type of life form. But again, like there is great historical evidence as well as modern research around the, issues of diseases, jumping species and so on, like where, again, I think eating that meat is playing with fire. Like you're really asking for trouble in doing so. Now it's not uninteresting there. Since I was a kid, there has been a conspiracy theory that KFC hasn't sold you chicken in 30 years. That they were lab growing chickens without heads. Like this is an this is an age old conspiracy theory from the 80s, like at least, when I was a kid. And most people, they'd hear that and they didn't really care. They believed it. And
most people don't care.
No, right. Yes. Yeah, you're totally right. And so, but like the issue, I guess part of my concern here, because a lot of what we do on Sovereign Tech is just bring up like, okay, what the fuck could go wrong? I understand that it's a lab and there'd be a high level sterility, or of a sterile environment, I should say.
That's not 100% foolproof.
Never.
Though.
Right. And so if they do lab grown chickens, okay, kind of like what they thought KFC was doing forever, I guess I'm still very wary that even if I felt comfortable eating the meat, I'm still incredibly wary over like that meat somehow still, I don't know. I just have worries and my primary concern isn't necessarily even like the nutrient density and how that affects my body, but like, I mean, is there any way, I guess what I'm asking here, is there any way that we could still run into the issue of like diseases and other things developing from like lab grown chickens?
I wouldn't want to exclude that possibility.
Uh-huh.
Not that. So I think that like the chance of a wild disease, a wild virus or bacteria getting into these cultures and infecting them, like it's a low possibility. It's still there, but it could happen in a very small number of occurrences.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the only thing that I would really be worried about is like there could be some sort of evolution going on that like isn't being monitored fully. There could be some sort of contaminant in the food or whatever
Mm-hmm.
nutrition they're giving to this tissue, and you wouldn't know until after you've eaten it.
So here's the flip side that bothers me is that, and that's a great point to bring up. And the flip side to what I'm asking is is there any way it could bring on the disease? This meat also, living species, living creatures have their own, defenses against disease and whatever else. And I imagine there have been plenty of cases where fortunately the immunity systems within a cow kept us from getting something after we ate them, because it killed it off in its own body before it went into our meat or before we ate them as meat. Okay. I guess there's a part of me that's worried. Yeah. Like what if there's some kind of, what if somehow this meat gets a strain of something, or something evolves along those lines, whatever. And like, it's not a living creature that can fight it off before it ends up on our table. And there's this widespread, I don't know, something gets spread, because of this. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I know from working in labs that there are certain bacteria that can infect your cultures that are very small and hard to detect unless you use specific types of dyes.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't really know to test for this type of bacteria unless there was something anomalous happening.
Mm-hmm.
And for that to happen, there has to be a certain like threshold number of bacteria infecting the tissue or the culture. And so when you cook meat, the concept is that like you're killing whatever bacteria exists on the meat.
Yes.
But if you don't cook it fully, then there's the possibility that you could get sick because there's still bacteria in the middle, which only happens if you're eating like ground beef or something.
Sure, who knows what, like trichinosis from eating pork. Yeah.
Well, that's a parasite.
That's a worm.
That's
yeah.
different.
Yeah.
So bacteria only exist on surfaces that have been exposed to oxygen,
Mm-hmm.
which is why if you're eating a full solid steak, you
Mm-hmm.
only have to sear the outside. You don't have to cook the inside.
Mm-hmm.
But and you'll be safe because the bacteria is only on the outside. But if you've ground up the beef, then the bacteria is all mixed in there. Then it's more dangerous to eat it raw because it could be that there's bacteria like in the middle. And I don't know what the process is going to be with this meat. Like if this does end up being turned into ground beef or whatever, there could still be incidences of food poisoning.
Sure. Maybe it's no higher than the average process through which people get beef on their, on their platter. So I'm just tossing it out there anyway.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, this is going to be a different kind of meat than any human being has ever eaten before
Mm-hmm.
because it's not going to be eating corn. It's not going to be eating grass.
Right.
Like they can't just feed grass to this beef, they're going to be feeding it like nutrients out of a bottle. So what is that going to make it? I mean, it's more meat than Beyond Beef,
Right.
but it's less meat than cow.
Yeah. I guess the question is that will it have the nutrient density of a grass-fed cow? Like, will it have that exact same? Because I mean, that's the great argument for eating meat.
Well, will it have the same fat content?
Right.
And that greatly affects the flavor.
Yes.
And the way that it cooks.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, this is inevitable. Like it's going to be a thing. It's going to be on your store shelves. Like that again, I know we said that at the top, but it's absolutely inevitable. I mean, what other, do you have any other concerns, any other perspectives on this? Do you think it's going to, I mean, at the very least, do you think it's going to convert a lot of people who are presently vegetarian or who are plant-based, and they're just going to say, oh no, I'm back to meat, as long as it's lab grown? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a certain percentage of vegetarians that will eat this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of Americans who will eat this without question.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some people who eat meat who would not touch this.
Mm.
And I think eventually, if this does turn out to be like a process that can be turned into something more energy efficient, that this will end up being in a lot of places, a lot of restaurants, even on spaceships.
Yeah.
Even on colonies someday that are like on Mars or the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only a possibility. I don't know for sure, because this might end up being too much trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, it is an incredibly expensive proposition at this time. Like if you tried to buy it, you could easily, for just a couple pounds, you could be spending a couple grand to get your hands on it. So
yeah. And as somebody who consumes things that have been grown in bioreactors, like I take spirulina and chlorella.
Right.
And those are single-celled organisms that are grown in these giant vats that are dried out and turned into pills, and I take those because they're high in nutrition. But there's so many warnings that you get when you go online and look up these things about, like, don't buy it from this place because it's got high contamination levels of heavy metals or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's just something to be cautious about, is that with anything that's grown in a lab, there could be a buildup of toxins based on what is being fed to that thing. Or there could be a buildup of contaminants. It just depends on like what the testing is, what they're looking for, and if they even find it.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a possibility of fixing it. So that's the one thing that is kind of worse about lab-grown food or bioreactor-grown food, like food that's cultured, is that there's more of a chance that, like, if there's any contaminants, it will build up in the system over time.
Right.
Whereas, like, with wild animals or with grass-fed beef, for example, that's less of a problem.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that this is ultimately a better thing for humanity, or do you think it's not even like a good Band-Aid?
I think it's better for the cows. I think that if we're able to shut down slaughterhouses with this technology, that's awesome. Because those places are disgusting. They're abhorrent. I think that, like, morally and like not only based on my code of ethics, but just based on my disgust reaction, I think it would be a good thing for the world if slaughterhouses were shut down.
There it is.
They're highly pollutive, and I don't like what goes on inside.
Yeah.
I don't like the products either. But so, like, if we can save cows by doing this, I'm all for that. I don't know if this is better or worse. I think I'd have to see more studies.
Yeah.
To really make a conclusion.
Sure. Jury's really out. I mean, certainly first blush, I would say if this keeps us from eating chickens somehow, great. Like I'm totally on board with that. So
yeah, I think there's a great line in Star Trek recently that really applies here. It's like, what was it that Picard said? There's no form of life so great that it has the right to destroy another life.
Oh yeah, no life form is so important that it has the rights to usurp, or that has the right to usurp the rights of another. Something like that. Yes. Yeah.
That's essentially how I feel about all animals.
Yeah.
And that might be a crazy extreme point of view, but yeah, there it is.
Okay. There it is. So lab grown meat, coming to a store near you. Pick it up. No. Anyway, why don't we'll take a quick break, and then we got to finish this one up. There's something we went on a journey, and we'll at least talk about it briefly. I think it needs to be talked about. Yes. So we're going to talk some movies. We'll be right back with more Sovryn Tech. Woo. Hey, baby, I know. You are tired of Gmail. You have had enough. Well, I have a solution for you. What I want you to do is you go to Fastmail, okay? It's fastmail.sovryntech.com. That's the URL you can use. You're going to get a discount with that. You are going to love this. This is email for email's sake. This company does nothing more. Just email, and they do it right. All the latest security technologies. You want to log into your account with your YubiKey? You can do that. Fastmail has your hookup. Very inexpensive plans. I want you to check it out. You go to fastmail.sovryntech.com. That'll get you the hookup, and it's an honor to have them as a part of Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
The Golden Stallion doing whatever he wants to do. The Climax.
It is time for the Climax, where we get to talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about. And of course, the we is me, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star. I just realized I hadn't said that at all this show. But not only me, but also, of course, the inimitable Ellen Sovryn. And
your new scientific advisor.
You have advised me on multiple occasions and really actually saved my ass. I didn't
want to brag, but
no, hey, when you know it, you know it. When you got it, you got it. That's how it is. I'll admit, like with that stuff, with nutrition, like that's always been a weak spot, or a blind spot, I should say. Not weak, but a blind spot for me. Like I never, because we work out together. We really practice a very, for lack of a better term, holistic health program overall. I definitely, instruct on a lot of the working out, the exercise, and all these other varying things. But like with the nutrition, you're just there. But I've always been that way. That's always been a blind spot for me is nutrition.
Well, you can't argue that it's a blind spot anymore, because you've now read the same books that I have about nutrition. So you're not blind. It's just that when it comes time to make food and you're hungry, you want that food now. You don't want to wait an hour to cook delicious, healthy food.
Get in the kitchen, woman. No.
I have the patience for that sort of thing. And I'm very proud that I've developed this skill over many years.
Oh, that's amazing.
But I understand that not everyone has the patience. They don't want to learn the skill. They just want to have food now.
That's a long history that we could talk about at some point. but it's just, again, it's always been a blind spot for me. And I really appreciate the research you've done. And it's not just, I can go and read books, but like you really, and partly because of your tremendous education and own passion around it, like you really understand, like from the atom up, how a lot of this goes and
put it into practice.
Exactly. And that's, I have to admit, like a lot of people, especially like these guys that are into the carnivore diet and everything. And like, I listen to them and I'm just, but you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I know you feel like you have the study behind you and all this, but you don't really understand from the ground up, what's like what you're saying. And I can hear it, there's that difference that it's even something in the voice.
Like, have you ever read a biochemistry textbook?
Yeah, right. And people can eat however they want to eat. I'm not here to like, get after people about that. I'm just saying that it's really, for me, it is such a privilege to have somebody in my life who really knows their shit and understands it, at such a deep level. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one area where I kind of get to where I get to add to your education is the education of science fiction. And I've even called it that on the show many times, where I've been putting you through a science fiction education. you're already well on your way because you're a nerd, you're a dork, in all the beautiful ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
Shamelessly dorky.
Yeah. I mean, a nerd in a beautiful body, but a nerd nonetheless, to quote a movie. And, oh boy. And so, one of the things that, we've talked about this, like how I got back into buying movies, into getting Blu-rays, was that I wanted, when we became friends initially, before we were even, in a relationship, when we became friends, I was like, oh, she's got to see these movies in the best possible light that they can be seen, at the best quality that they can be seen. And that really got me going back down the road of buying Blu-rays. And so we have a lot of fun going through my collection. And of course it gets added to often enough, but something that I added, and I forget what, I think you asked me about it.
Yes, I did actually, because I saw an SNL skit that made reference
to this
movie. It was very funny.
With Jim Carrey being Joe Biden. That was fucking hilarious. Yes, you're right. That's what it was.
Yep. And I guess we'll just say it. I mean, he went through the teleporter, but there was a fly in there.
Right.
He ended up becoming the fly. And he landed on Joe Biden's head. That was the skit.
Yeah, well, SNL, go ahead.
Yeah, so anyway, SNL did this skit. I saw it. I was like, you know what? I've heard so many cultural references about The Fly, but I've never seen it.
Yeah.
We've got to watch this.
Yes.
But then you told me there's not just one Fly movie.
Right. This is a whole franchise. It's 5 films. And what was serendipitous was that Shout Factory, which is a company I love. They put out these great old school Blu-ray releases where there's like tons of special features and everything. I mean, they really do great work, and they do new scans and all. It's wonderful. They put out a box set of all the Fly movies, and whether or not what they were inspired by, the Joe Biden thing. I mean, SNL only did that skit because they knew that these things were cultural memes. Like these elements of the Fly, like that people would recognize the transporter and so on, and that people would get it. And that really speaks to that these movies were, at least at the time, a big enough deal. The reason I want to talk about them and that we watched them is that I really don't know why this isn't considered one of the great franchises in history. Like, this should be right up there with Alien.
It's an amazing series of films.
Yeah. I mean, it should be up there with Star Trek, with every major science. This should be, bottom line, this should be a major science fiction franchise. But most people don't. Maybe they've seen 1 or 2 of the films, maybe 3. But most people don't include these movies in the conversation when you talk about great science fiction franchises. And I want to talk about them here to correct that. Because I don't know anybody else that talks about these movies. Maybe Geek's Guide to the Galaxy could, maybe they did at some point, but if they haven't, fuck them. I mean, fuck them anyway. But these are fantastic.
Every single film that we watched in this series, I was like, wow, that's a great movie.
Yes. I had seen 3 of them. I saw the original, which most people remember with Vincent Price. I saw the original, which is from 1958. I saw The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, which is the one that SNL was kind of mimicking and that most people really remember because it's such a gross movie.
Yeah, and Jeff Goldblum is in it.
Yeah, right. And he did great. And that's from 1986. And I did see The Fly 2, like on a Fox movie night, amazingly. And that's from 1989. But there's 2 movies in between that, or in between all of that, which is Return of the Fly, which came out in 1959, which also had Vincent Price in it. And then there was Curse of the Fly from 1965. Now, Curse of the Fly, and part of the reason I was really willing to get this box set, Curse of the Fly is very rare. In fact, no one had seen it since it had been in theaters until 2007. That's almost 40 years later that nobody had seen this movie.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an easy way to hook me. Rare books, rare movies, that's my jam. That's my stuff.
Just put rare in front of the title.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm a rare guy. And so
yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I love you.
I love you.
So you have, it's a 5-film series. They are not all related. The Fly and from 1958 and Return of the Fly is a direct sequel to The Fly. In fact, it's an impressively direct sequel in that they really did reuse or rebuild a lot of the sets to a very careful level. I mean, they're very precise. There's a high level of precision of making sure that the movies flowed well together. But Curse of the Fly seems to like jumble up The Fly and Return of the Fly.
Yeah, it takes elements from both movies and kind of screws with the timeline of things.
Yeah, and is somewhat of a sequel, but still a good film.
Yeah, very good film.
Different, but good. And then The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and The Fly 2, those take place after the other, even though you could argue there's some inconsistencies or contradictions between the two. Like at the end of The Fly, it seemed pretty clear that the baby, because The Fly 2 has to do with Jeff Goldblum's, that character's son. Okay. At the end of the original Fly, it's abundantly clear, or it's stated anyway, that what's her name?
Brundle. Oh, wait, no, you're not talking about Brundle. You're talking about the woman,
guy, the woman. Yeah.
The reporter.
Right.
That he had sex with.
Yeah. Is that Gina Gershon? Whoever. Anyway, she works for an editor, and at the end of that movie, it sounded like the baby that she was having was actually the editor's baby. Not Brundlefly's.
In the alternate ending.
In the original ending, that was true. In the alternate ending, which we saw in the Blu-ray, which is a great reason they have Blu-rays, there's that weird baby butterfly scene. Fucking weird.
So in the alternate ending, she wakes up from a nightmare saying like, "Oh my God, I'm having Brundle's baby."
Oh, you're right.
And the reporter guy is like, "No, you forget, it's my baby.
No, you're
not
right.
His."
Yeah.
But you never get confirmation in the original ending whether it's the Brundle baby or the human baby.
Because it just ends with in Brundle's lab.
Right.
Where he's dead. And yeah, okay, no, you're totally right. I got that confused. Bravo. Okay. So maybe there's not so many inconsistencies between The Fly and The Fly 2. Anyway, I kind of want to talk about, like, let's go movie by movie a little bit. Okay. We don't need to spend a ton of time on this. But The Fly from 1958 with Vincent Price.
This movie was amazing. It started out like an Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Yes.
It immediately hooks you into the mystery.
Yes. You are wondering what the fuck is going on. And you have no idea. And it does a tremendous job. Actors are all top of their game, in making you like, wait, why is she listening to The Fly? Because you have no idea. They don't explain it yet, what happened. Keep going.
Oh, okay. So anyway, the story it starts out with a murder mystery, essentially.
Right.
And then it jumps back in time a few weeks to this guy who's doing research in his basement, essentially.
Who is the guy that was murdered at the beginning?
Right.
Yes.
And his wife will sometimes come down into the lab. She'll like bring him food. He'll show her what he's working on.
Mm-hmm.
So he builds these teleporters that can move objects from one side of the room to the other.
Yeah.
And he's trying to perfect them because sometimes he sent an ashtray through and the words showed up backwards on the other side of the teleporter.
Yeah.
So he's like trying to build this to fix it. He actually makes the family cat disappear and just doesn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after the cat disappears, he's like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. So he starts using smaller animals, and eventually he finds out that it works, that he can teleport.
He does perfect it. Yes.
Yeah. So he can teleport living things, and he's like, to prove this, I'm going to put myself through.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it, but there's a fly in the teleporter with him, and
he ends up with like the head of a fly and the arm of a fly.
You don't see it.
You don't see it
initially.
at first. Yeah.
Like he's just typewriting these letters to his wife and sliding it under the door and whatnot. But eventually you do find out that like he has the head and the arm of a fly, and that somewhere out there is a fly with the head and arm of a human.
Right.
And so most of the film is like him telling her, go find this fly, catch the fly, bring it here. We'll go through the teleporter again together, and hopefully we can separate out.
Mm-hmm.
But like after a couple days of being like this, he starts feeling these weird urges and has strange thoughts. And it's almost like he has two consciousnesses battling in his body. It's like the split brain experiments that you were telling me about.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, they can't find the fly in time. He has his wife help him commit suicide.
Yeah.
And she takes the blame for it entirely.
Yeah, it's a great murder mystery.
Yeah.
And eventually the fly with the human head gets found as well and kind of exonerates her because the police investigator, and this is all happening in Canada, by the way.
There's only two people that see the fly with the human head.
Vincent Price, who's the lead character's brother, the fly's brother, basically. And then, yeah, they see
the main investigator.
Right. And they kill it. And they kill that fly.
Right.
So
because he wanted it destroyed since he couldn't rescue himself.
Right. So this movie, I mean, again, keeps you hooked and you're still figuring everything out. And you're there's the tension around, wow, are they really going to like lock this gal up, for what happened? They don't believe her story and everything. But then more or less everything turns out fine. It kind of in the end, other than the fact that her original husband who turned into the fly, he's dead no matter what.
Yeah. And the real element of horror in this film, because it is categorized as a horror film.
Yes.
But I think it's absolutely horrifying to imagine being split that way.
Yeah.
Like having your head transplanted onto a fly, and then having a fly's head transplanted onto you. Like, what is you and what is the fly?
Yeah.
And those two elements clashing and fighting with each other.
Yeah. Now I want to bring up something that I found to be very, very, that it was a realization watching this now. You have to understand. So this is basically a transporter that gets developed in this movie. And this is before Star Trek. This is in 1958. Okay. Long before Gene Roddenberry even had the fucking idea, probably. I think he stole or he lifted a lot from this movie for Star Trek. I think he took the transporter from this movie, and Vincent Price gives a really great little speech at the end about that the most worthwhile thing to do is to search for truth.
And it's also the most dangerous thing.
Right. But he says, like, he even calls his brother, he's talking to the guy's, to his nephew, to the guy's son. And he says a line to the effect of, it's like he was a person exploring. He almost literally says where no man has gone before. And to have the transporter in that line, which is so core to Star Trek, I think Gene Roddenberry lifted a lot from this. And it's not a bad lift because it's a damn good movie. Like if you're going to grab some great stuff from science fiction, go ahead and grab this. There's that. What's amazing to me though, and I didn't realize it also again until I saw this. This is a cultural meme. Help me, that's from this movie. Because that's what the fly says with the human head.
He's stuck in a spider web at the end of the movie.
Now, what I find to be incredibly impressive, and one of the reasons that this entire franchise should stand as one of the great franchises in history, is that there's that phrase, which is a cultural meme. Nobody even knows where that comes from, but so many people say it all the time, right? If they're pretending they're small, they're just like, help me. In the Jeff Goldblum fly, I think it's Gina Gershon. The actress, she says, be afraid, be very afraid. Now, everybody says that today. Like, I mean, that's a classic line. That comes from that movie. It is amazing that that the original and a remake both create such a powerful cultural phrase, cultural meme, really. In fact, I dare say that's unheard of. I can't even think of another movie where the original and the remake both have entered the collective consciousness, cultural consciousness, and have like lines that are spoken by everybody. I mean, to that level. That's amazing to me that ended up happening. Anyway, so yeah, the 58 film, just phenomenal. An absolute classic, still eminently enjoyable today. It's like watching a great episode of The Twilight Zone, I think. And it works. Did you find The Fly to be scary? Like the hybrid that ends up, Arthur there, whatever.
No, I think that he retained his humanity for long enough in the film that it didn't get to the point where it's scary. Again, like I said, the real element of horror was the split consciousness. Yeah.
So it's what it implies that makes it scary. I think that's part of what makes it a great movie.
Yeah, it makes me sick to my stomach to imagine, like, suddenly I've just been spliced into a fly.
Right.
And now I have to live like a fly does.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess part of that too, like knowing what happened in later versions of The Fly kind of adds to that level of disgust. But each movie kind of steps up the element of horror more and more.
Yeah, so Return of the Fly, which is a sequel, basically has to deal with the guy's son wants to pick up his daddy's work. And Vincent Price, his uncle, is there and basically concedes and ends up helping him out. A fraudster gets involved and kind of steals the technology. I mean, or tries to steal the technology to sell it. But a somewhat similar thing happens. But the fraudster, like in each of these movies, the reason that the fly ends up like joining with a human, they always do change it up, I think, in a very logical way to where it's not always the same accident, because I think that would get cheap.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we have to go too much into the plot around Return of the Fly. But they definitely bring in a lot more. There's a lot more deaths, a lot more killing. The interesting thing is that you're actually rooting for the fly, I think, in Return of the Fly.
Yes. Yeah.
Like he's a heroic character. It's almost a comic book movie long before that was much of a thing. And it delivers. Like, I think it's good in that sense, to where, yeah, like there's horror elements, but at the end of the day, it's a very heroic film. In my opinion, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I agree, because, he gets turned into the fly against his will.
Yep.
I mean, like the fraudster is caught by, the experimenter.
Yeah.
And so the fraudster throws him into the teleporter, and he sees that he's scared of flies and being
which
turned
is traumatic
into a fly.
because of what happened to his dad.
Right.
Yep.
So he does this on purpose. The fraudster turns him into the fly creature on purpose. And then after that, the fly creature is just trying to like get revenge and then save himself by going through the teleporter again with the fly version of himself, which he actually succeeds in this movie.
It has a happy ending as compared to the first.
Yeah.
And I think that works. So it's nowhere near as like, I mean, when you're watching the original Fly, like you are so engaged because you just don't know what's going on. You're so hooked. It's not at that level, but it's a fantastic movie in its own right. Again, and partly because I do consider it a proto comic book film. Before that formula would get perfected, I think it really, really works on that level.
It's different from the original, but still really great. And
very faithful to the original, which I always love that when a sequel really gives a shit about its predecessor. So it's got that. Now, Curse of the Fly does not give a shit about the predecessor. However, for a movie for 1965, this is probably, I would almost argue this has the grossest and most horrific thing of the entire series.
It's up there. Yeah, it's definitely, I'm not going to say that. I think the next one is the grossest.
You think Brundlefly is the gross?
Oh yeah. Well, but this is definitely the grossest of the original trilogy, I guess you could say. Yeah, like before there was CG, before there was like really great effects.
Yeah, this is this movie. You're gonna walk away from this movie like, oh fuck, like it's just a tragedy, like all around. It's a nonstop tragedy.
Yes.
Other than maybe the gal ends up like with all that family money in a big house, which is good for her.
There's a girl. She's a pianist, a concert pianist. Yes. In the beginning of the movie, you see her breaking out of a mental institute and running away in her underwear.
Yeah, it looks like a Russ Meyer film. Yeah. Not that I'm, complaining about Russ Meyer movies, but yeah.
Yeah, but in the end of the, like, after all the tragedy and everything, she does end up inheriting this house. But there's a lot that happens in between. Like, she meets the scientist. They end up getting married after knowing each other for a week, which is really problematic, but whatever. She goes to his house. His house is actually like a big farm complex, I guess.
Yeah, in Canada.
Yeah. And they are carrying on the experiments with the teleporters.
Right. And now the interesting one in this is that they're actually teleporting. It's so successful. They're teleporting between London and Montreal.
Well, so the older gentleman did. He did teleport from Montreal to London as an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Then the police found out he didn't have a passport, so he's like, quick, send me back now.
I mean, I would just say, like, you don't understand. I teleported here, jackass. Like, you know, and borders are going to mean nothing once this technology hits the streets. And, well, anyway, it doesn't go there.
So, yes, there's a new element of there's a teleporter in a different country, and there's somebody else in that laboratory who is kind of a wild card character because you don't know who they are or what their deal is, but they're young. They want to have their own life. They're tired of working in the lab.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil this one too much, because this is the one where normally I don't care about spoilers because these movies have been out for however many decades. Like, if you haven't seen them by now, that's on you. But this is one that for most people has only been available, if you're lucky, 10 years. And so, you know, I don't want to give it all away.
Okay.
But I will say that, I will mention the gross element. Okay. Because you know it's coming when it comes. So let me say this first. This movie, I think it has the weakest script of them all. But when they teleport basically two people at the same time.
Oh my God.
And they appear in London as a mass of whatever the fuck that is. It's just fucked up. It's like human centipede level
creepy.
Fucked up.
No, it's beyond that. It's like,
yeah. I was like, oh no. I mean, that's exactly how I reacted to it.
And then you tell that poor guy to dispose of it?
Yeah. Oh, it's fucked up.
No, that is not okay.
Yeah. That was, in my opinion, like, that was, if there's a gross level, which is kind of part and parcel of the Fly franchise, for me, that takes the cake. Like, that just took it. But it's not like, it's funny because the second one is very much a feel-good movie. This is no feel-good movie.
No, it really is a tragedy. Like you said, like and the more the movie goes on, the more you discover how deep the tragedy is.
Yeah.
Like this has been going on for a long time.
Yep. It's messed up. So anyway, this movie apparently was not a major success. I mean, it would appear there are reasons that it never got a real home video release until 2007.
And just be aware, there's an element in this movie that is kind of racist.
Oh yeah.
It's like analogous to blackface.
Well, we'll just say it. There's a gal who's clearly a white gal, and like they did horrible prosthetic work to make her look Asian, and it just fails, and it really comes off as insulting. Yeah,
like why didn't you just hire an Asian person to do that role?
When they hired an Asian guy to play the husband, you know, like it just didn't make any sense. Yeah, it was really like that just looked dumb. It was just not not a good look.
No. But I mean, also throughout these movies, there's themes of misogyny, and you could say that's like a product of its time where they're just laughing off, oh, you silly woman, stop worrying.
Yeah.
Get back to the kitchen.
Yeah.
But it's just, you know, it was a very different time, and not that excuses any of the behavior, but just be aware of that when you're going into it. Like, not only is this gross, but there are other things that might irk you about it.
Yeah. Well, fast forward to 1986, and we end up with a quasi-remake by David Cronenberg, of course, who is a legend, great filmmaker, Videodrome, Scanners. I mean, you go down the list. Also, he's an actor. In fact, he's acting in Star Trek Discovery as we speak, which is still a shit show. But regardless, David Cronenberg and what he makes is usually pretty good. And it's Gina Davis. I don't know why I kept saying Gina Gershon. Gina Davis is the one who she plays the lead gal in this, the reporter or the journalist, as well as Brundle's, Jeff Goldblum's love interest in the film. So anyway, this movie is widely regarded a classic. There's a reason, again, that SNL mimicked it. You know, they knew what they were doing. And because most people would recognize it. And a movie that has won awards, particularly for its effects of grossness. And I mean, this is the one, if anybody's seen any part of the Fly franchise, this is probably what they've seen, because it's just it was that big of a movie. It's Cronenberg's most successful movie to date, probably ever. And Jeff Goldblum's performance is top notch. in this, and it is different enough from the first Fly. And yeah, I mean, go ahead. The movie's gross, right? I mean, we don't have to get into the plot.
Every minute that I see Brundle's face, I am grossed out. I mean, but after he turns into the Fly, not before.
Yeah.
But this movie also tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of grossness, a lot of like oozy, slimy things falling off and falling out,
but great movie, right? I mean,
fascinating concept.
Yeah.
I think as far as science fiction goes, it's really awesome. It's got a lot there.
It's exploring things.
Yes.
Yeah, and it also, David Cronenberg has some weird thing about like the new flesh, especially if you watch Videodrome and some other movies. He's really about like humanity becoming something different. And I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing, but whatever, that I noticed that more watching this movie this time around, like just how much of like Cronenberg's, real touches are on it, and that he's trying to get something across. I thought some of the more interesting things were what we caught in the special features on the Blu-ray disc, where like there was a scene where he like practically ate a woman in like a dumpster.
Oh yeah, that wasn't even filmed.
Right. All you got to see was a script.
Storyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess they cut it out because it might have been too disgusting or something, but it was supposed to be like a prelude to what happens at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the Fly at a certain point is able to, the Brundle Fly, I should say, at a certain point is able to vomit stomach acid onto his food.
That'll
and then
melt flesh.
Slurp it up.
Yep.
As a fly eats. So you can imagine what this script would have looked like if it had been filmed, where the Brundle Fly actually eats a woman.
Yeah. It was really, yeah. So, I mean, well, with this one, with the Fly, give me a ranking on this one, like out of 10.
Oh my God. I don't know. I mean, maybe the fact that I'm so disgusted by it is a good thing as far as like
mission accomplished
ratings go. Yeah. I like that it held true to the teleporter thing. I like the experiments that he did trying to figure out how to make this thing work, and that he still stumbled across accidents like with the cat and the monkey, the baboon. It's actually really horrifying, that part too.
Yeah.
I thought the transformation that he went through from human to human Fly was, while being absolutely revolting, kind of fascinating.
Sure. Yeah.
You learn about, like, at first he thinks he's being purified.
Right. Because he's so much stronger and everything. And yeah.
But then he starts becoming like heartless and cruel, and he does things that I think he would have regretted if he were in his right mind.
Right.
I also think it's really sweet that his love interest in this movie, the woman, like, she is there for him. She wants to help him, even though she's disgusted.
Yeah.
Like, how could she not be?
Yeah.
But she still wants to be there for him and like support him through this period of transition.
Right.
And she just knows, like, there's nothing that I can do. He's got to figure this out on his own.
Yeah.
But he never does until he comes up with a solution, but it's not a humane solution.
Yeah.
Like, the only way that he can turn himself back into a human is by recombining with another human.
Well, getting a little ahead, but yeah. So, right. He realized what he has to do is what he thinks he has to do is combine the genome of Gina Davis's character, their unborn son, or their unborn child, whatever, and like bring them all together into one body. Kind of like what ends up happening in Curse of the Fly, where you get that fleshy mess from multiple people being transported into one transporter.
Yeah, but he was trying to program the computer to just make one person, not like a mess of a person.
Not a mess of a person, but it would be all of them in one.
Yes.
Because in The Fly 2, the sequel to this, we find out some interesting things. So anyway, yeah. So what would you give this out of 10?
For what it is?
Yeah.
I think it deserves a 9
Yeah.
out of 10.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think it's a fantastic movie. It's perfect.
Yeah, it really goes the distance
Mhm.
in telling this story, and it does not spare any detail.
Right.
And you feel every part of it. I mean, like the emotions are so deep.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes me quiver thinking about it.
Yeah.
And not in a good way.
Yeah.
But I don't like the ending. I think it's so sad, and that's part of it. Adds to the tragedy for me that the Gina Davis character ends up with her ex-boyfriend reporter guy who's her boss.
Mm-hmm.
I think that should not have happened.
Yeah.
I think the love story between Brundle and Gina Davis was so great, and it was a tragedy that their love was broken up by this transformation. And she ended up going back to her shitty ex.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. Well, I think The Fly 2, which came out 3 years later, I thought that it followed up very well with this movie. And of course we know what ultimately ends up happening is Gina Davis's character ends up dying during childbirth.
Yeah, like right at the beginning. So there's something I don't understand about that movie.
Sure.
Like, how did they end up in this corporate environment, this laboratory environment
Well, so
where she's giving birth?
So that's the company that Brundle, that Jeff Goldblum's character is working for in the first movie.
Right.
And so that's kind of how, like, they come in to the lab because they probably have to answer questions to the cops. Hey, what the fuck is going on in here? It's on your dime, this company. And so I think that's how they end up there. And they probably, whatever happened, because the guy, the editor from the first movie who's taking care of Gina Davis, that she ends up back with, unfortunately, but he seems to think that they said they were going to take care of her, but they let her die. Like this corporation.
Well, she died in childbirth because she gave birth to a mutant.
Yeah. Who seems very human at first.
I don't understand why she allowed this pregnancy to go on because she was so adamant about getting an abortion.
Yeah, so that's the part that really doesn't make sense because she makes it abundantly clear she's not going to have this baby. Like, that's just not going to happen. And I don't know if somehow Bartok Industries, which is the company, I don't know if somehow they convinced her, whatever. That doesn't exactly make sense.
Maybe they just didn't allow her to get the abortion.
Right.
I mean, based on all of the other shit that they did, they could have easily just kept her there on the compound and not let her go because now she's a science experiment.
Yeah, unfortunately. And, anyway, this movie, deals with the son growing up, and he grows up within this corporate environment. He's like a lab experiment himself. And
he grows up at hyperspeed. Essentially,
yes.
At the age of
5 years.
5, he looks like a 20-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. Played by Eric Stoltz, who does a great job in this, I think, actually. Falls in love with a gal. In fact, this is one of the only other movies besides Spaceballs that has Daphne Zuniga in it, which I think is great. She played Princess Vespa in Spaceballs. I remember not being too hot about this movie when I first saw it. Granted, that was at least 25 years ago. I thought this movie was great. I really, and it's another one where it, what's amazing is that it also did a great job of, I think, being that a comic book film, basically, much like the original sequel to the original Fly was. I think it lived right up to that and played right off of that very nicely.
Because you're still rooting for the Fly in this one.
Exactly. Yeah, the Fly is absolutely the hero in this, and it's really, really cool to have the monster be the good guy. I think this movie works really, really well. It's a simple story. There's no real surprises in it, but they do such a great job delivering. I don't know. I thought it was awesome. I really like this. It's not as good as the Fly, but it's good.
The corporation is the evil.
Yep.
Party.
Yeah, classic, 80s or late 80s theme. I mean, that the corporation's evil.
And it really tugs at your heartstrings. I mean, there's some parts of this movie that I think are so sweet and heartbreaking at the same time.
Yes.
Like, when this kid is young, he looks like he's 5 years old. He might only be a few weeks old. We don't know.
Yeah.
he ends up breaking into one of the labs where they store a bunch of animals.
Oh, with the dog.
Yeah, and he makes friends with a golden retriever there.
Yeah.
And they end up sending this dog through the teleporter,
Mm-hmm.
and the dog comes out mangled.
Right.
And he's told that they put it out of its misery really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But then he ends up going to a party with this girl that he's falling in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees this dog is still alive. They're still keeping it alive. And there are people joking about it.
Yeah.
And he's so disgusted and upset. Like he ends up putting the dog out of its misery.
Yep.
And realizing that like he's been lied to his whole life, that
it creates a chain of events.
Yeah.
Where he gets the reality of his existence. Yeah. And he ends up, for varying reasons, he ends up like, and it's not, he doesn't have to go through the teleporter to become the Fly. It's just his genetics that he ends up becoming the Fly in this. And he goes basically on a revenge, or on a path of vengeance, throughout it. I think what I really like about it is because it also has a happy ending ultimately. And what's really interesting is that he finds a way by doing what his dad said he was going to do in the first movie. He basically, you find out that Brundle was right. If Brundle mixed in human DNA, in the teleporter, like that, he could be cured of this, because that's what ends up happening with this character, with the hero in this movie.
Yeah, he just needed a human sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. And of course,
he did get.
He gets with a villain, and that, so people are like, okay, that's good, right?
What crawls out of the other teleporter is not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this movie has its share of grossness as well. Like it deals in that. But it does create commentary on the first film, which a lot of sequels don't always pull that off, and this one did. And I thought that really worked. It's a good movie. I'm not going to give it a 9. Like,
yeah, this one a little bit lower, maybe like a 7.5 or 8.
Yes. Yeah. 7 or 8, that range. I would give it that. But this movie is not as well remembered, I think, as it should be. Which again speaks to the overall point I want to make about the franchise. I mean, is that these are all good movies. Yeah. Even though the third one doesn't make a whole ton of sense and gets a little fast and loose with the continuity, I still think all of these movies, like this is a tremendous franchise that has, if not great movies, perfect movies even within it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I also think it has enormous potential. Like it's clearly inspired a lot of modern day fiction. And I think it could really go places. Like if it was a comic book, for example, like this, there's just so much to explore in this universe. Yeah,
which IDW did make a comic book sequel to The Fly 2. So that's out there that people could check out. But I feel like this is something, I mean, you could really go far with this, like replace kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the Galactic Federation or something, until humans understand space and spaceships and everything. Let's have a science fiction franchise that relies more solely on teleporters than it does on spaceships at all. Like, you don't need that. Star Trek's dalliance with that. In fact, there's an episode of Enterprise that whole cloth copied the Fly franchise. The one with, oh shit, what was his name? Anyway, the one with the guy where he's developing the quantum transporter.
Quinn. Dr. Quinn.
Yeah, Quinn. Right, exactly. He's the guy that ended up inventing, like, transporters for humans in the Star Trek universe. And he even gets his back fucked up, which is exactly what happens in Curse of the Fly. Like, they just ripped it whole cloth, the whole story. And it worked because it's a good story, so it fits in Star Trek. But I mean, you could really go places with a franchise like this. I mean, it's kind of Stargate-esque if you wanted to go far into the future. But I don't know. I'm just disappointed that nobody's wanted to pick up and run with this.
Well, I understand why the teleporter technology has continued on into the sci-fi world, but The Fly has not. Yeah. Because The Fly is really a story about the pitfalls, the failed experiments that led to the eventual successful teleporter technology and like all of the stages that it had to go through to be perfected.
Yeah.
So it's really telling the backstory of like teleporter technology.
Right. But the thing is that like it because it has the cultural cachet of like having so much history, you know, from the first movie being out in 58 or whatever, it has the opportunity, and the movies in a kind of background way did kind of what you were saying with the horror was of the first film, where like, okay, like what's human and what's the fly? And there's a great possibility to explore what makes us human in the first place. You know, like with the first movie, you could have really gone far with, okay, so he has a fly head, but he's acting like Arthur, I think was his name. He's acting like Arthur. So he's like still human. So how much of the human mind is actually in the rest of the body that was still human and not fly? You know, like there's so many places you could really explore the human condition with this, with these stories. And under the auspices of where, or you could even explore, because look, the most unbelievable part of Star Trek is the transporter. You know, like that's technology, and it's unbelievable in The Fly too, but it does it well, so you run with it, you know? Because like, okay, well, is the person that appears in the other booth, is that the same person? You know, or is that like a copy? Like what, like those are things that this kind of franchise could explore, that this technology could explore, that I think are great questions that science fiction doesn't touch enough. So again, that's why I say it's such a shame, and you can even explore it within the movies themselves. It's such a shame that it doesn't get as much credit as any of these other major franchises do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too that like in The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, he talks about how the computer needs to be creative and reinterpret the matter that it's processing.
Right. It doesn't understand the flesh.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. The poetry of the flesh.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And he has to teach it how to get excited about the flesh, like a grandma pinching the cheeks of the baby.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying, is that like there's so many like philosophical roads you could go down with this, and just know, you know, it's just sitting there waiting for somebody to pick it up. Well, I don't know if it'll ever happen, but yeah, I love this franchise. I mean, what do you have to say? Do you agree with my statement that it should be considered one of the major science fiction franchises?
Absolutely.
In history? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, even after the first 2 or 3 movies, I was ready to say that, but
yeah.
I feel like it's such an awesome series of films. I can't believe that, like, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody really talk about these.
Right. Yes. That's why we're talking about them now.
Yeah.
So
get out there and watch these movies.
Yeah, damn right. So anyway, yeah, I mean, again, this really should be one of the major franchises. It needs to get revisited a lot. I thank Shout Factory for putting the gorgeous box set out there for people to get their hands on. Do so, folks. They're not a sponsor, but if they ever wanted to, I'd let them. Anyway, so I think we need to eat. Do we have any of that lab grown stuff downstairs?
Oh, we don't need to eat.
Oh,
we can survive indefinitely without food. We're evolving.
We're breatharians now? No. No, we're not going that crazy.
No, we're understanding space and time.
Oh, right. We can think the food. Yes. No. Anyway, that is it for this episode of Sovereign Tech. Ellen, is always tons of fun. You really, boy, you talk about drawing stuff out of me. Yikes. I'm feeling a little vulnerable after this episode.
I love it. And if you love it, please request that I be on the show more often, because Brian only lets me out of the basement twice a month.
Oh, are you kidding me? You love it when you're shackled up. Don't give me that. Don't get your collar on. No. Woo! That's it for this episode. We gotta stop because things are getting hot in here. And
I do think that we need to go eat.
Yeah, we do. All right. Merry calendar, everybody.
Merry calendar.
Woo! We will see all of you on the other side.
Thank you for listening to Sovereign Tech, an Osiris One production. Now go out there and make some trouble.
No zoonoids were harmed in the making of this podcast.